Hey, good evening, and oh my god, Forrest died from the weight. He was just alive just a few moments ago, and now he's dead.
Yeah.
Ignore this movement. This is just pre-death spasms. Like, that happens,
You
right?
never get past those death throes.
It's just gas escaping the body, folks. Just ignore him. Yeah, welcome.
That's my entire job that you just described. It's just gas escaping my body.
I think that's a description of any talking head anywhere. Is just, yeah, this is a gas valve, and it just occasionally expels hot air. Probably why we have so much global warming. But anyway, hello, folks. Welcome to The Line. This is the Sunday show after dark. My name is Eric from the channel Skeptics and Scoundrels. And to my right on the screen, you will see Forrest Valkai. Forrest, how are you doing tonight? Other than the sudden death that you just experienced. Go ahead.
I'm good. Did you know that you have 62 spinal nerves combined into 31 pairs? I didn't, because I've spent this entire day finishing the goddamn Sex and Sensibility video instead of studying for my neuro exam tomorrow. So I don't know that, I guess.
Hey man, priorities. I think that's really useful information for, I don't know when, but it's eventually one day. One day you're going to be sitting in a bar having a drink with some friends, and on trivia, that question will come up, and you go,
"It's going to come up.
This is my moment. This is why that happened." I love, like, obviously you're into biology, so this, like, these aren't just like random useless facts to you. You're actually learning, your profession, your trade. But no, finding little factoids like that, little things that are just like, wow, that's interesting. I never knew that, even though I'll probably never use it in any practical sense in my life. It's kind of nice to know. I learned something today.
I love it.
I appreciate that kind of stuff, and it's kind of like,
you want that to be the rest of the show? Because I've got my notes over here of everything I'm supposed to be memorizing right now.
Hey,
we can go through it.
We can just watch you studying. I mean,
I've got my,
put your head
my
down.
neuroanatomy textbook, and we'll all sit here together, and we'll all talk, and we'll try to memorize the Circle of Willis as a family. We'll all work through it. Yeah. It'll be great.
Or he's just going to read to himself silently, and then occasionally he's going to go, and we're just going to
and then just every 45 minutes, when someone says something about God that's really fucking silly, I'll just pipe in and be like, "Hey, that's dumb. By the way, do you know what your fucking somatosensory cortex is for? Let me tell you." It'll be great.
I already see our watch numbers dropping like a rock. Yeah. So I didn't set up my mirroring software, so I actually can't see you guys in my camera at this moment, but that's okay. I'll get this fixed up once. Yeah. My computer took
while you're
a big
doing
dump.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I was going to give you time to do that. I was going to do something different. So you had the opportunity to.
I would appreciate that. Take it over. No.
Sure. Hey, everybody out there watching. Are you up to date with the saga of international con man Tommy Valkai? Because if you're not, you can now get scammed at valkaimerch.com. Look at this amazing design, which I finally got around to publishing. It's actually up now, and you can buy t-shirts and hoodies and mugs and posters. It's all at valkaimerch.com. And you notice that's a different website than my original merch store. That is because this design is so complicated, my old merch company couldn't handle it. And so I am currently in the process of changing merch companies just so I can sell this shirt. And then I'm going to move all my other designs over right now. So if you go to valkaimerch.com right now, you can buy this shirt and just a regular Valkai Labs rocket logo shirt and whatever else. But those are the only two designs that are available. But I am currently in the process. You can get the I Think shirt. You can get the Wing Finger shirt. You can get the Home shirt. You can get all the other ones. I'm moving them over there right now. So check that out if you're into silly ass memes made out of a level of pettiness that is only available to content creators. Mere mortals cannot be as petty as we can. But I spent real money and hired a real graphic designer. Thank you very much to Glory Jackson for putting that together for me so I can put that on shirts and mugs and tote bags and everything else. Go check it out. It's pretty cool. ValkaiMerch.com.
That's awesome.
I'll put it in the chat right now. Is that a good time for you?
Go for it. I think I'm done with my Marion sovereign thing. Go get that item, folks, before the scalpers scoop them all up and start selling them on eBay for like 4 times the price, because I anticipate this will be a highly demanded item, much like graphics cards right now, which is a whole nother topic. But yeah, so I got my shit fixed here. I was going to say my computer took a huge dump like 2 weeks ago and I had to completely wipe it, and it's been hard getting it back together. But yeah, so we're back here now. Forrest just hawked his wares, and I think we're ready to hopefully talk to some theists. Yeah. So yeah, for anybody who wants to call in, we prefer theists because theists are fun to talk to. A lot of people here are here for some, as Apologia said, a pugilistic blood sport, and that's what drew me to these types of channels. So, but anyway, Forrest and I are nice people. We'll be gentle if you're gentle. If you start doing things like defending slavery, denying science, or maybe even just like denying reality, trying to push contradictions as both being true at the same time, we might get a little bent out of shape. But if that happens, we get bent out of shape, it's because of you. No, I'm just kidding. But
it's your fault.
Seriously. Yes. Yeah, it's your fault. That's not an abusive relationship at all. But no, we want to talk to theists. We want to hear why you believe, what reasons you have to believe, because we're both atheists. My shtick is that I don't see good reasons to believe in a religion, and I also don't think that you necessarily have a good reason to believe in religion. So if you think I'm wrong about that and you think you actually do have a good reason, feel free to call in. Give us compelling evidence. Give us something that we can look at and go, oh, wow, this can only point to conclusions that involve your religion, or conclusions that must require your God. And we'll be honest, you're not going to bring us a single point that's going to have us throw our hands in the air and say, oh, God. But perhaps you could bring a series of points where when you compare them all together, it eliminates us down to only one conclusion, and that's your God is real. If you could do that and change our lives, brownie points probably with you and your God, but also you'll be saving 2 souls. So call on in. The number is down below, 1-720-619-2288, or use the web link in the description. And for any callers who do call in studio has a bit of a lag, so we'll try not to talk over you, but there will be times where it'll get awkward. So just bear with us. But anyway, yeah, I think we're ready to go into some calls here. We have 2 atheists, and we have 2 atheists and an undetermined person in the audience. So we're going to go ahead and go to the undetermined first, because maybe it's theist, or maybe somebody who's thinking about leaving theism. We'll bring in Claire, her from Kentucky. Claire is questioning and has questions about hell. Hi, Claire. How you doing?
Hello.
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Doing pretty good. The show's going and everything. I think stress and anticipation before the show, like stage performance, gets me. But then once the show gets going, I feel great. So I'm doing good.
It's like a roller coaster.
It is like a roller coaster. Once you're over that top part, it just gets much, much better. But anyway, I'm sorry, Claire. Go ahead. You have questions about hell. Can you, before you go into that, can you maybe give us a little bit of information about yourself? Do you consider yourself a theist, an agnostic, an atheist? You don't know? Kind of tell us a bit about yourself and where you're coming from.
I was calling myself an atheist for a while, but like every time I have like an anxiety attack, I worry that maybe God is real, and maybe I'm just like denying it because I'm scared of God being real. Like, what if I was like suppressing it so deep that even I didn't know my true belief?
That is probably why in the Bible it talks about having childlike faith and how you need to believe like a child. Literally, just don't think about it. Because when you do think about it, you realize that belief's kind of a weird thing. and it's difficult to really pin down. It is entirely possible that you are lying to yourself and all these things. But at the end of the day, that's something that's kind of unfalsifiable, isn't it? There's no real way to determine if that's happening. What you can say is that in your clearest, most sober, most rational moments, you're able to think this particular way. And when you're wrapped in fear and thinking horrible things and you're freaking out and you're having a panic attack, yeah, you're probably going to think something a little bit different. And I think you need to think seriously while you're in the clear-headed state, which of those two mentalities you want to give more attention and more gravity to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But sometimes it has happened, like, if I have stopped taking my, like, antidepressant or anti-anxiety medicine, then I get, like, scared of, like, hell and scared of God and stuff. But then
I would imagine if you stop taking anti-anxiety medication, you'd probably be more scared. And having a cultural boogeyman that you've been predisposed to believe in since you're a kid because you're surrounded by this propaganda all the time makes sense that would be the thing that pops up in your head.
Yeah, Clara, if you don't mind me asking, you said you called yourself an atheist, which might mean you call yourself something different now. Were you raised under a religion? Were you raised under a religious family, religious doctrine?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic.
You were raised
That'll
Catholic.
do it.
Okay. Yeah. So you actually strike me very similar to what my wife has said, because my wife was also raised Catholic, and she also underwent stress and religious trauma from that Catholic upbringing, and she still occasionally has the same worries that you do. So and that doesn't like mean that those worries are false or invalidates or anything like that, but you can at least understand where they're coming from. Because sure, there might be a God, and that God might have some type of afterlife that might be good or bad or whatever. But until we have the evidence to confirm that and to actually believe it, we should treat that afterlife of that religion we were brought up in the same as we treat the afterlives of any other religion. Now, I want to maybe go on a limb to say that you probably don't sit around worrying about the Islam version of hell, do you? Or perhaps like negative reincarnation from other religions. You don't sit around worrying about those things.
Well, I'm like, my brain is like so good at like snuffing out any bit of hope that I try to give myself. And I've like heard the arguments from atheists before. So I'm like, well, you're not scared of this hell. And then I start thinking, well, I should be scared of that hell. And so I am kind of scared of other hells.
I think, can I introduce you perhaps to another concept of hell? And this is one to maybe hopefully help you. Imagine a God, because all these religions have something in common. They basically say, if you don't do what my God says to do, he's going to make you pay. Let me introduce you to a potential religion that is the opposite. Let's say God is real, and the only people that he sends to hell are the people who believe in hell. Because perhaps this God values intellectual honesty. Perhaps this God values clinging to the truth and pursuing the truth in spite of threats, in spite of potential dangers. One that values that type of bravery and that type of intellectual integrity. Imagine a God like that, and that God's going to send anybody who believes in hell to that hell. That God is just as, I know there's no religion that actually teaches as far as I know, but that God is not logically impossible. That God hasn't been demonstrated like the other gods, but also hasn't been falsified. So potentially that God could exist. And so now you're going to find yourself in a situation here where you can't believe both of these at once. You're going to have to reject one and accept the other, or just simply say on both, I don't know. It's a wash. Why am I worrying about something that I can't even evaluate properly? And then spend your mental energy on other things that you can deal with. Basically, this kind of reminds me of Pascal's wager. Is like you said you talked to atheists before about this. I'm sure somebody probably talked to you about Pascal's wager before.
I've watched a lot of atheist videos.
Yeah.
So I
almost certainly
know.
the idea of just a quick recap. The idea of Pascal's wager is, well, you have so much to gain by believing. You have the favor of God and a potential positive afterlife. You have so much to gain by believing, and you have virtually nothing to lose when you believe. But you have everything to lose when you don't believe because of the various hellfires of the different religions. But the problem is that type of thinking, like I said, ignores out of hand and without any good justification other potential gods that might punish or not punish off a different criteria. It has the built-in assumption that the religions of the world we have right now have the only accurate description of any potential gods, and that's simply not the case. There's infinite combinations of characteristics that a god could have, infinite criteria that this god could use to evaluate who he punishes and who he doesn't punish. Or there might just be a god that doesn't do any of that kind of stuff, or there might not be a god at all. There's so many possibilities out there that it is all a wash. It's on the same level for me as stressing out whether I am pleasing the alien overlords from Omicron Persei 8. Like that, I don't spend time worrying about that, even though it's not impossible. It might be the case that there's aliens from Omicron Persei 8 and they're watching me and they really don't like what I'm doing and they're going to punish me later. Like, but I don't have evidence for that. And I can sit here and just explain to you why you shouldn't have to worry about this. But obviously this is your internal thoughts, your feelings. This is something that you need to evaluate and you need to figure out how to work out. I guess, let me ask this. Well, I don't know. Let me ask you, what are your thoughts on this? Like, have you thought about these things before, or do you think that there's some other way you should be looking at it?
I have thought those things before.
Okay.
So if I can, I just want to like throw out like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you're still speaking, Eric. I apologize.
No, it's fine. I was gonna ask her what her current, like, which way she leans right now, because she says, Claire, you say you worry about these things, but if you had to sit down and write down on a piece of paper what you actually believe to be true, what would you write down?
Right now, I would write down that I don't have reason to believe in a God.
Okay.
All
right.
But like when I like get upset, sometimes I get like so anxious that I start thinking maybe God is real. But when I'm happy, that's what I think.
Yeah. Forrest, I'll let you give your thoughts here in a moment, but yeah. And I think you mentioned that you're on and off antidepressants, and you think one thing when you're in one emotional state, and then when you're in a different emotional state, your thoughts think something much different. Those types of wild swings back and forth based off of your emotions can be hard to sort through. It can be hard to deal with, and then you look back and go, which one is true? Because I feel so strongly about both. Perhaps you may want to look at, how do you feel about other things during those times, and use that as kind of your anchoring point. Do you swing wildly left and right on other things, like, I don't know, whether or not a certain person in your life really cares about you, or whether or not your friends really, are your friends and things like that? Because I've heard other people, when they have these types of swings, they start asking themselves very self-critical and very worrying questions about, like their life, their friends, whether things are genuine, whether people in interaction with them are genuine. They can get very, very uncertain about stuff that they're normally certain about. Do you ask yourself, perhaps, do I do these things for other questions in life? And then use that as your anchoring point and go, this is how I feel all the time about these other things. So can I take what that feeling is and take that anchoring and apply it to these other questions that I'm having, that I'm actually swinging back and forth on? Is perhaps my advice, but I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor, so I'm just a dude giving my advice about something I really have no clear understanding of. So take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, Forrest, please go ahead with your thought there.
I would just say, Claire, that like you're talking about like when you're in these moments of anxiety and everything, and like you argue with yourself, and then you immediately have your own counter argument and go back and forth. Like, something that I think really people need to understand is that you cannot win an argument with your own brain. No matter whether you are right or wrong, you will not be able to out-argue your own brain, because you know what the next possible thing to think is. You know what an emotional and logical argument for you looks like. Like, it doesn't matter. You could argue with your own head about why the earth is round, and I guarantee everything you come up with, your brain will come up with a counter argument, because that's how thinking works. And so, like, you're never going to win and have your own brain go, ah, damn, I guess I can't think about it anymore. It's just not going to happen. And especially when it comes down to anxiety or depression, having been there myself, I can tell you from experience, you will never, ever, 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 ever win that argument. You just have to pick a point where you're going to be like, all right, here's where I'm going to be, and I'm going to fix this in my own way. And I'm not going to sit here and just like try to outthink my own neuroses at this moment. That's not going to help. It's not going to work. And especially if you're coming from a position of somebody who used to be Catholic. Catholicism, more than most kinds of Christianity, heavy reliance on fear, heavy reliance on guilt, heavy reliance on shame, heavy reliance on emotional reasoning. And so you are primed and prepped for the worst kind of reasoning and the most abusive kind of thought processes possible to convince you of something that is truly horrific. And now you, as an adult thinking person, are trying to deal with that, and the deck is severely stacked against you. So I don't think you need to feel bad about that, and I certainly don't think you need to listen to the demons whenever you're at your most frightened and most depressed and lowest points. Don't listen to those heads. Listen to the voice of reason and of sanity and of compassion whenever you are at your most level-headed, most sober, most clear, most relaxed, when you are actually able to do the work of thinking this out without falling into the trained heuristic of the fear I feel is God's voice, or I'm only thinking this way to avoid believing. I'm trying to convince myself, who am I really lying to? Am I lying to me, or who to all these ridiculous things that your brain is telling yourself, because that will scare you. And so you're leaning into that fear, because that's how anxiety fucking works. And also, I think you should give yourself some compassion for being worried about things that are not rational. That's not like a negative strike against you. In moments of extreme emotional distress, I have spoken out loud to dead loved ones before, knowing for sure they can't hear me. But I needed that part of my brain, that emotional, non-logical part of me, to have that momentary closure of telling this person something I need to tell them, even though I know they are not there and they could not hear me anyway. But it helped me emotionally, because you can't logic your way through your heart sometimes. And so, do that. If you need to do that, just come out the other side logical is all. That's totally fine. Be there and live there and experience that, and allow yourself space to feel those things, and don't shame yourself for having thoughts or feelings, even if they're irrational ones. And then you come out the other side a better person, and you move on with your life as somebody who can think a little bit more clearly about it. Also, important to point out, neither one of us are fucking therapists, yo. So, definitely hit up Recovering from Religion and see if maybe they have some tips or tricks that might be able to help you out a lot better than us two idiots can.
That's excellent advice right there. It's probably by far the best advice that
we should have. That should have been the whole call, but here we are.
Should have been, yeah. Well, it's like even though, and actually, sorry, Claire, I'm trying to talk over you. We want your feedback on what we just said, but we're giving you our bad advice out of compassion. We actually really want to help you. But that advice right there, recovering from religion, talking to people who are trained to help those like you who are undergoing this type of trauma, who are trying to work through what religion has inflicted on them, to work through those questions and how to cope with the psychological damage that these religions have caused. Because Claire, you're not alone. Lots of people deal with this. Like I said, my wife is one of them, even though she doesn't contend with this as much these days as she used to, as far as I can tell. She still, those thoughts are still in there, and they're going to be in there forever, because these were ingrained into you when you were a kid. And the best thing you can do is to, while you're in your good, stable, calm, balanced emotional states, as I think you are right now, do your best to engage that logical brain of yours. Do your best to think about it. Do your best to prepare yourself for the next episode that you have, where you start getting wound up, where you start having emotional anxiety, and you start thinking these things. And then try to bottle up your calm and your thoughts now, and then open that bottle when you need it later on. And that's easier said than done. I understand, but that's usually what I do when I have, because I go through some depressive states every once in a while where I'm like, I'll have a lot of doubts about my capability, how people perceive me. Nothing hellfire related, because I wasn't raised with that doctrine in my Christian belief, thankfully. I was in an annihilationist religion called Jehovah's Witnesses. But I don't have to deal with that part, but I do deal with other negative thoughts that will creep up and will start to gnaw at me. And I have to stop myself and say, this is just a moment in time. This is not what I normally think. This is not me at my norm. I need to just surf this out and get back to a better state. And that's what I do for myself. But recovering from religions are going to be your best bet. But please give us your feedback on what we just said. Is there anything new, anything old in there? Hopefully me and Forrest are not making things worse with our words. Hopefully maybe give you some stuff to think about and all that. Tell us your thoughts. Or if you don't want to, don't you have to?
I think I agree with most of what y'all said.
Cool.
Okay.
Right on.
Well, as we said, recovering from religion is probably your best way to go. Do you have other people in life, like perhaps a counselor, a therapist, a close friend, that perhaps you can tap into and use as a resource if you aren't already doing that already? Is there anybody like that available to you?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a therapist right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Good luck
Yeah,
to you.
it can be
They're
difficult.
expensive, but they're
Yeah,
worth it.
They are, and it can be
Yeah.
difficult. My advice with that is, when you do find a therapist, it can be very difficult to find a good one. So if you find one and it's just not working for you, that person's just not working for you, then it sucks. But you have to go find one that does, because not all therapists will tell you what you need to hear to cope and work through your issues. But but hopefully you do find somebody right away. Hopefully that person does help you. And feel free to call us back. Tell us how you feel, how you're doing. And yeah, best of luck to you. I hope you find some balance and some peace in that, because this is not something that is your fault. This is something other people did to you. And there's no guilt on your side for dealing with the stuff that happened to you when you were a powerless kid under the control of religious parents or religion or clergy or whatever church you grew up in. You say Catholic. This is not your fault. You deal with the consequences, unfortunately, but it's not your fault. So go easy on yourself, be easy on yourself, and one step at a time. Take your time. Don't rush things. Good luck.
Yeah. You're awesome, Claire. If you're asking these kind of questions, I think you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Claire.
You have a good evening.
Call us back anytime.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Call us back. Okay.
That's how I always feel about, like, whenever we're talking about trauma. It's like, this is not your fault, but it is your problem. And so now you get to decide, like, how you're going to handle this and how long you're going to allow it to continue to victimize you and how long you're going to allow it to continue to hurt.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just decide to not be hurting anymore, but you can decide when you're going to take the reins a little bit more and where you're going to drive yourself. And again, can't stress this enough, not a therapist. And that may be evident by the shit that I said in this call. Who knows?
There's probably a therapist or two in the audience going, "No, don't say that."
I swear to God.
We said everything
Jesus.
in the best of intentions. If anything was incorrect,
and it's all wrong.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I am probably the least qualified to talk to anybody about the trauma of the Hellfire Doctrine, because I was lucky in that bullet completely missed me, because witnesses are annihilationists. The worst thing that is coming my way is just oblivion, and that's okay with me. That doesn't bother me. Transitioning to oblivion, that bothers me. Once I'm there, I'm not going to care, because I'm not here anymore. So that's
right.
It's just, I'm a terrible person to talk to about that, but thankfully, personally, that's a bullet I inadvertently dodged, and I'm happy about that. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to another caller. We have two atheists and a theist. Sorry, atheist, we're going to bump you down the list just a little bit more. 'Cause that's the way it is. I'm so sorry.
Yep.
All right, we're going to bring in Ulrich. Pronoun is he, from Mexico. Ulrich's a theist. Seashell fossils in the Alps prove Noah's flood. Ulrich, how you doing?
Okay.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
I remember when I was a child, they found a lot of seashell fossils in the Alps. And I've always thought that's because of Noah's flood. But let me hear what you think, how they came there.
Yeah, when
Plate
we want
tectonics.
to answer your question. Yeah, we want to answer your question. But when I was a kid, when my mom was driving us to Utah I grew up in Las Vegas. When we drove from from Las Vegas to Utah, there's a mountain pass you go through on I-15, and they basically carved through the mountains to get the freeway to go from one side of the range to the other. So you can actually see a lot of the geologic column in there, and you can see very clear lines going back and forth, back and forth. And my mom told me that's because of Noah's flood. When the waters were receding, it was causing these marks to appear on the mountains as the water was receding. And I accepted that as evidence of Noah's flood back when I was a kid. And actually for a good part of my 20s, I still look back at that and said, yeah, that's evidence of Noah's flood. So Ulrich, why do you think that is not good evidence of Noah's flood, unless you think that is evidence of Noah's flood?
I think it is, yeah. So I want
you think the lines
your
in
counter-argument.
mountains are from? You think the lines in against mountains are from Noah's flood?
Yes, from the overturning of basically all the earth.
Okay. Do you think that maybe there's other explanations that can explain those lines?
I've been listening to your show, so you have your other explanations. But why are there seashells in the mountains in the Alps?
I know we're going to get to that. Yeah, Forrest has got that in the bag, but I just want to walk us through this first, okay? Because I want you to understand our perspective before we answer your question. What other explanations could there be for those lines?
It might be somebody like doing that on purpose, bringing them there, having them brought there, and then schools find them. It's like, oh, it's all exciting, but yeah, the conspiracy.
So you think people go into the mountains to draw lines on the mountains for school field trips?
No, but you tell me what other explanations that are.
Have you ever heard of something called sedimentary deposits?
Yes.
We can see it happen. We can see it happening in real time right now with things like you can go out you can go out into geology right now and see sedimentary deposit live real time happening. So that's another explanation for those lines. So we have three explanations on the table. We have from the flood. We have somebody ran out there and drew it before a school field trip showed up. Or we have sedimentary deposit, which we can acknowledge and see happening. Which of those is the best explanation?
But how did the sedimentary deposits happen? That be the question,
Weather.
Right?
Weather.
What caused it?
Stenos. Those are called Stenos laws.
Yeah. Weather and the earth, tectonic plates and erosion and all that works together.
It's going to be deposition and deposition.
Yeah, it grinds. It basically wears rocks into dust, and that dust settles elsewhere and resolidifies back into sedimentary rock.
But still, the Alps are very far away from the ocean. Even if all that stuff happens.
Ulrich, sorry, the thing that unites all of this, like, are you familiar with the concept of plate tectonics at all?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard of it, but I wouldn't say I'm familiar with it, like, to explain it, no.
That's fine, yeah. So the crust of the Earth, you know what the crust of the Earth is, yeah?
Yes.
You know what I mean when I say that? Okay, cool. So the crust of the Earth is broken up into large units called plates that are basically, this is not exactly, but you can think of it as like they're like islands floating on an ocean of magma. So like the inside of the Earth is all molten, and then you've got these hard outer shell, this crust that's broken up into pieces that are all moving around on that outer surface. And this is something we can actually, around that inner ocean. And this is something we can actually measure and watch happening. It's very, very slow. It moves at about the rate that your fingernails grow. But we can test it. And so this is what causes not only continents moving, right? That's why the continents are in a different place now than they were several hundreds of millions of years ago. but also it's one of the major things that drives up mountains. When two tectonic plates hit each other and run into each other, and they're both moving towards each other, well, all that earth can't just go nowhere, right? And they can't phase through each other like magic. And so usually one will subduct under the other, it'll get pulled down, or sometimes they'll press together and they'll bunch up. And this is where you get mountains being driven up by these two plates colliding and all of that earth crushing together. And so what happens is when you have an area that used to be an ocean, like the Alps, like the Andes, like the Himalayas, right? You get these places where these tectonic plates are colliding. This used to be the bottom of an ocean. And now all this earth is piling up and getting squished together and forming a mountain. Now you have rock that was on the ocean floor now being at the top of a mountain. And that is why we consistently, not just in the Alps, but like everywhere where there are mountains, we find marine fossils up at the top of those mountains all the time. We find a lot of clams and oysters and other brachiopods and bivalves. We find crinoids. We find trilobites. We find fish. We find all sorts of marine fossils up at the top of mountains because of plate tectonics. And the reason why we know it's that and not because of some flood is because if it was the flood where mountains were, underwater by however many cubits, I forgot what it was, but like where these mountains were underwater and then the fish were on top of the mountains, then those fossils would be younger than the rocks that they're embedded in. But that isn't the case. When we test the dates of the fossils and also the rocks and everything around that area, they're all the same because that's where those things came from. Does that make sense, Ulrich?
Yes. Yeah. So
cool.
And
similarly, that is where when Eric is talking about these striations, these lines in the sides of mountains, that's because of what we call Steno's laws of superpositioning, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but it is the foundation of our understanding of geology and especially geological time. It's simply that different, as Eric was saying, the earth that is above water gets weathered and eroded, and dust and sand and stuff gets blown all over the planet and it deposits. And so all the time, the lower part of the crust is being pulled down into the mantle, and then it gets spewed up in volcanoes and vents and all these other things. But the top is being constantly added to. This dust is settling and forming new sedimentary rock. And so when we look at rock layers, right, we see these different layers in what we call strata in the rocks. You go to the Grand Canyon and you see all these bands of different colors throughout the rock. Steno's laws are simply saying that the layers on top are the youngest and the layers on the bottom are the oldest, and that the layers are continuous across the whole landscape. So if you can find this layer with this chemical signature, it's going to be the same across the whole way. And if you find a layer that's intruding, that's cutting through several different layers, that is the youngest of all, because that's the only way that logically makes sense. And so when we look at mountains and things, like Eric was talking about, you're driving through the mountains, and you see these lines, what you're seeing are layer after layer after layer after layer of deposition of different ages of the earth that have been laid down. And then something cuts through it. Either people cut through it to build a road, or erosion cuts through it with a water channel, or something, whatever it may be. Usually you get a small fracture, and then years of rain and fluid makes it bigger and bigger and bigger. That's how the Grand Canyon came along. And so that's what we're seeing. It's not that somebody went and just dumped a bunch of fossils up there for fun. It's not that somebody carved these lines into the sides of the mountain. It just takes time, and these things happen naturally. And you can see this in both laboratory and field experiments. You can literally do small scale experiments demonstrating this.
So Ulrich, we just showed.
Does all that clack?
Go ahead, Ulrich.
Yes. So can Noah's flood be disproven? Be the next question.
Yes,
very yes. So. 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like us to do that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so let's just logic our way through it really quick. Noah's flood the entire Earth is completely covered in water. Where did all of that water come from, and where did all of it go afterwards?
The Bible says it was within the earth before, and then these chambers, the underground chambers, opened, and that's where the water came from. Also from above,
right?
of course.
Sure. Do we have any evidence of great deals of water in the center of the Earth or hanging out in the sky? Anything like that?
We have this line between the American and European continents. I once heard something about that.
Yeah, that's the transatlantic ridge, where we can actually see, when I was talking about plate tectonics, that's a great place to see it, is in that transatlantic ridge. We can actually see the tectonic plates spreading, and we can do radiometric dating on the ocean floor to test the dates of these rocks. And sure enough, the farther away we get from that ridge, the older and older and older dates we get, because that's what would logically make sense. Let's try a different thing, just for funsies. Supposedly all plants were the entire Earth was underwater for a year. If I remember correctly, it was a little over a year that the flood lasted. So how do you suppose all these plants lived under salt water for a year?
Some of them were like floating. I mean, I haven't really thought about it, but I think that there are plants that are able to float, right?
I mean, some maybe, but like the fact is that we have a bristlecone pine tree that's like older than this flood was supposed to be. So like that guy didn't float.
And even if they could float, the salt water would kill them just about immediately.
Yeah,
because those plants
exactly
they don't jive well with salt water.
There's also things like coral reefs, which are ecosystems that need to be, generally, there are some deep water ones, but like coral reefs need to be in shallow water. They rely on photosynthesis just like a plant does. And so if the entire Earth is underwater, how did all the corals survive? Also, corals are animals. So did Noah bring coral on the ark? And if so, how did that work?
I mean, explanation that I'm thinking of, that I'm not totally denying evolution. So I think after the flood, evolution has happened, and so some new species started to exist.
Okay. Do you believe in the concept of kinds then? That Noah didn't have to bring every single possible species of animal. He just needed like one of, say, the elephant kind.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So the reason why I said elephants there is because it's a great, you can watch my last YouTube video where I actually show the math on this. Or you can watch, I believe Erica Guts at Gibbon also talked about this before. Like what we call the generation time for elephants, which a generation time for a species is the amount of time that it takes for them from birth to become sexually mature and then also gestate offspring and then produce new offspring. So like that entire time there, with the average generation time of elephants, looking at the timeline, the biblical timeline since the flood, as answers in Genesis, one of the most well-known, Bible realist organizations in the world, say, for elephants alone, just as an example, every single elephant born since the flood would need to be a completely different species with different features, different skull shape, different tusk style, like everything, completely different species than its mother, which was a completely different species than its grandmother, all the way up till today, when suddenly they just stagnate and become just African and Asian elephants. That's what would be required for us to have the species diversity that we see in the fossil record since the time that the flood supposedly happened. Does that make any sense for that to be the case?
Yes, but for example, let's take dogs and wolves and all of that. That can happen within like 6,000 years, right? Like we can have a differentiation between dogs and wolves.
Sure, because dogs and wolves can breed after a couple of years, maybe, and they have a pretty short gestation. Elephants, that's not going to work that way. Elephants take a very long time to get sexual maturity, and they gestate their young for like a couple of years, if I remember correctly. Let me just double check my numbers here. Elephant sexual maturity age is between 14 and 17 years old. So you need this thing to be at least 14 years before you can breed another elephant. And then also gestation period is 22 months. So almost 2 years. So it takes about at the minimum, it takes about 16 years to make one new elephant, right? So it's not like a dog where we can crank out new breeds every couple of years, just by selective breeding. And again, this is just one example. We can move on to another one if this doesn't work.
I want to jump onto that, add another item on that dog pile about disproving the flood. Guts Gibbon talks about this at length, and it's called the heat problem. That much water with that much pressure on the earth, that much radioactive decay, that much tectonic activity, if you buy into that part of the Noah myth, or the flood myth rather, where the continents are moving so rapidly because of the water, the amount of heat that is generated by such an event would basically turn the earth into a star. It is way too much to radiate out naturally and safely. So just that itself, just the heat that would be generated from that much water doing what it supposedly did, according to flood myths pushers, it's impossible. We would not be here. Life would not be here. We would still be a molten ball of rock floating through space if that was the case. Okay. So Ulrich, we've gone through 5 things now. So we talked about, you brought up seashells on top of mountains. I think it was the Himalayas or something. I talked about lines going through canyons. Alps, I'm sorry. Seashells up on the Alps. I talked about lines through the Rocky Mountains in Utah. We talked about where does the water go? And you said, well, we have a big rift, a big ravine down in the ocean. It probably drained down there, kind of like a big toilet. We've talked about animals evolving and having to evolve at such a rapid rate after the flood. That makes that impractical. And now we are also talking about the heat problem. 5 things that you can look at and go, well, the flood explains it this way, or the flood explains it that way. And when it comes down to the heat problem, the only answer is God magicked it so that we didn't have this problem. Yeah. God had the flood and did it in a way where where he just waved his wand and made the heat go away, and it wouldn't be a problem. The problem with those explanations, and the problem with the explanations that, and not the problem, the good thing about the explanations that we are raising is that the explanations that support the flood are all ad hoc, unsupported, and all you guys can do is just point to an old book to say that this happened, while all the things that we explain are natural events that we can observe right now. We have tons of people studying these things right now. We can support this with evidence and observation and reason and logic and science. And there's a reason why science keeps on growing and progressing with this method, and the Bible doesn't get us anywhere useful. And that's because science is analyzing things and saying, we don't know the explanation to this phenomenon we see. Let's investigate. And the conclusions of everything we just brought up, the conclusions of evolution, the conclusions of the theory the conclusions of evolution, the theories of geology, all those things, all developed after these observations occurred, whereas flood pushers are starting with their conclusion and trying to shoehorn the facts to fit that conclusion. So that's why we reject the flood. And I think we've also brought some really good reasons why the flood is just straight up falsified, not just rejected, but falsified. It could not happen. It did not happen.
We haven't even touched the surface on what could have been talked about there.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
We took out some of the big stuff, but we could talk about this for hours and all that. And we also show that the explanations that science presents is supported. It is much, we have much higher confidence in the scientific conclusions because it's supported by evidence, reason, and logic rather than my book says so. So that's the divide between us. And that's kind of why at the beginning I was trying to bring up the lines thing, because I had hoped at least you would know about sedimentary deposit and erosion and how we see it happening right now. Hopefully you could have looked at that and go, oh, actually, no, the lines aren't from the flood. The lines are from this other thing. And then you can take that reasoning and logic and going, well, maybe I'm having a blind spot with these fossils on top of the Alps. Maybe the flood didn't do that. Maybe there's some other explanation, which Forrest presented with tectonic shift and the fact that the earth moves and changes. And fossils from millions of years ago can end up way high in the mountains as the earth just changes gradually over time.
I also just popped, if you're curious, like I I make videos on my YouTube channel where I am making fun of these things and kind of having fun with like creationist, stuff. I just popped in the chat 2 videos that I did that they're gonna be silly and mocking. So like, take them with that in mind. I'm not trying to, I don't want you to feel attacked when you watch them. But like, the first one is called "A Flood of Nonsense," and I have this whole section in there about just like questions about the flood that kind of don't make sense at all. Like, what's asking about why are fossil layers the way that they are? Where did the parasites live on the flood? There's like so many things like that. We talk about tectonics, we talk about spreading, and then the second one that I posted in there is called Ark Encounter. It's my review of a Eric Hovind movie about Noah's Ark, where I do the math about elephants and all that, and I show that in there, and it's just one of the many reasons why it just doesn't work. So if you want to check those out, I would encourage you to watch those things if you like.
I also encourage you to look into how the Egyptians were building pyramids both before and after the flood, and brewing beer throughout the whole time.
Right.
I presented that to a couple witnesses that Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door, and they're like, well, some people started the pyramids and then the Egyptians showed up later, and it's like, oh, well, let's go ahead and resume this work. And it's just like, it was just such an ad hoc thing. It's like, it's
a big enough flood to lay down all the tectonic layer, all the strata, all the layers, everything, but didn't cover the pyramids that were, whatever. And Ulrich, is any of this making sense? Like, are we missing anything? Do you feel like we've avoided a question or anything like that?
No, that's okay. Yeah, I'm going to think about it. Yeah.
Well, cool. Good. That's all I can ask.
That's all we want. Yeah, call us back if you have any further questions. I've enjoyed. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us and hear us out on all this, and just to ask good questions. Because if there's more stuff out there, if there's something that's interesting, we want to hear it.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good day.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I wonder if he was named after Ulrich from Skyrim. Remember Ulrich? He's the first guy you meet when you wake up in the wagon. Oh, good. You're finally awake.
Yeah.
It's a meme. So I'm sorry. I'm
right.
I'm not your type of nerd. I'm a gaming nerd. You're one of those nerds.
I play some game when I have time. I actually just started a couple of months ago. I had a little bit of time, and I got to get back into Skyrim just a little bit. So it makes me smile to think about. I get to play like maybe a week of video games a year. And so I picked Skyrim for this time.
Oh, okay. Excellent choice. And I think I got that wrong. It wasn't Ulrich that greeted you when you woke up. Ulrich was gagged because he had the dragon.
Yeah, he has a voice.
It was the other guy. I don't know his name. But
also, it was Ulfric, wasn't it? Not Ulrich. You fucking...
Was it Ulrich? Fuck. Maybe
it's Ulfric. Ulfric Stormcloak. Shouted him to pieces.
My brain.
That guy.
Wow, I totally failed here. Let's move on. I'm just going to ignore this.
You just blew.
We're going to move on.
Ulrich von Liechtenstein from A Knight's Tale, played by Heath Ledger, the cinematic masterpiece known as A Knight's Tale. Ulrich von Liechtenstein. That's what it was.
That's it. And I just heard static that whole time, so I'm just going to drop in this music. Okay, let's go ahead. I think I've talked to many Christians when one of their points gets disproven. They're like, let's just move on to a different point. Yeah.
Everybody in the chat is calling you a fake gamer now, and I love that for you.
I'm a fake gamer. That's why I got all these games behind me.
Yeah, it's all posing. It's all just there to make you look smart. I've never read a single one of these books either. It's how we do it.
It's one of those things where it's like man, my wires get crossed where Ulrich and Ulfric or Alfric. Just like this, it gets like my brain has a way of just letting things go if I don't use it. And I played Skyrim like 10 years ago at the last time. So just your brain starts it just kind of like gels together, and you remember the memory, but you don't remember like the data from it. But anyway, okay. Let's go ahead. And who's been waiting longer? We have nothing but theists now.
We got nothing but theists. We have two lines open still just for theists as well.
Yeah, call in 720-619-2288 or use the web link, and we'll get to talking to you. Okay, we have. I'll just take the person that was waiting the longest. Gotta click harder. Okay, we have Isaiah. Him from Korea. Isaiah is a theist, and he wants to talk about God's origins, which is interesting because I think most theists think that God has been here forever and doesn't have an origin. So,
right.
Isaiah, please elaborate on your question. Let's talk.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for taking my call. Second of all, it's a very interesting call you guys had, and thank you for handling that so respectfully. I think that was very interesting. But
we
so
are
I
as
have been
nice as
listening
our callers allow us to be.
Yeah, and he
Right.
didn't cross any lines that we set out at the beginning. So yeah, I think we kept our end of the bargain.
So I was once an atheist myself. I'm a Christian now, and I have listened to a lot of these call-in shows pretty much on a weekly basis because I still think it's interesting to see kind of like what people believe in. And every time I hear like Christian callers, they really want to press atheists on like trying to account for, you know, the universe or whatever. And then whenever they're asked to account for God, they're just saying, "Oh, well, he just always exists," you know. And I think it seems like that's some kind of like, I'm not exactly sure if this is the fallacy. Maybe you can correct this if that's special pleading. Is that correct?
Is, yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah. When you say that,
Yeah.
well,
So-
okay, we're going to set up an argument based off of these criteria, and one of the criteria is, you know, like there's no such thing as infinite regress, or things can't be around for forever. Then all of a sudden they say, but we can't explain these things also. So I'm going to create this explanation that is exempt from these rules, and then that explains
Right.
things. That's the special pleading part. They're basically trying to exempt something, typically the God that they prefer, from the rules that they set up in their
Right.
argumentation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I do find this very problematic as a Christian, and it has got me to kind of like start to think about this. If I had to like kind of explain possibly where God came from, and I really don't know. I'm not going to convince either of you, but just I've thought about this because if you guys already grant the possibility that all of this came about by naturalistic means, by processes that are not at all in any way related to anything divine, I mean, would it not make sense at some point some technology or some being would evolve to the point where either they could reverse entropy one and rewind things back to the beginning and basically cause it kind of like in some weird bootstrap paradox, or two, just create like basically a simulation which we could potentially be living in without being would be a God, say to us, but it's not really like a divine being as we might traditionally think about it. But those are really the only two things I can think of to try to explain what Yahweh or Jesus. If you put a gun to my head and try to say, well, where do these things come from? That's really the only I could think of. But I just wanted to bounce those off of you guys for a little bit.
Sure.
I would give you a resounding because I don't know if that's possible or reasonable. Like I could very easily say eventually we could develop technology to do X, and that X could be anything at all, and it could be no matter how fantastical you like. I have no way of testing or verifying that. As far as I know, the whole entropy thing is pretty set in stone in terms of physics, but that's, you know, the reason why we do science is because we're learning new stuff all the time, and maybe there's some way in which that doesn't work or can be reversed. Like, I'm not a physicist, so like,
right.
I don't know. What I would tell you is, even if I could say any of that is for sure possible, it would remain an unfalsifiable claim if we were trying to say that that is indeed where the world came from, and so, or where the universe came from. And so I'm kind of left in the exact same position, whether I believe this is true or possible or not. I'm left in the exact same position as I am when people talk about the universe being a computer simulation or a video game, or I'm a brain in a vat, or I'm in a mental asylum believing or last Tuesday was the beginning of the universe, and all these other things. It just kind of leaves me in the exact same place where I'm like, maybe, I don't know. And then I have nothing else to talk about.
And referring to your two questions specifically, Forrest touched on it, but like, yeah, with the reversal of empathy, can something evolve initially or technologically accomplish the ability to reverse entropy? I doubt it, but I can't say for sure. It could be that if the big bounce theory is true, then entropy just kind of completes itself, and then the universe collapses back in on itself and starts a cycle all over again. So you want to consider that a reversal of entropy. It perhaps could just happen naturally once this instantiation of the universe is completed and it's going to cycle into the next one. Don't know if that's necessarily the case or not. It's there's science that supports it. There's mathematics that support it, but problem with big questions like this is that there's limitations to the things that we can analyze. Namely, like the first few picoseconds of the Big Bang. We really have no idea what's happening there because our mathematics breaks down at that point. And at the end of the universe, when projecting out that far, when all the energy is so evenly dispersed that it's essentially useless, all the black holes have evaporated. We have no idea what's going to happen next. So it's hard to even just like determine whether a species could exist at that point and do something about that. I've heard some futurists and some science fiction, or not science fiction, well, science fiction writer, but he's also into actual science, talking about possibilities of like, well, why don't we just jump a dimension to another universe that's not so far along in its cycle, So like anything can happen. Who knows? I don't know. But when it comes down to that, and to go back to your original question, when we're talking about God, there's a lot of things that we don't know. And the thing with adding a God to the mix is, you mentioned special pleading, and that has something to do with it, but also it violates Occam's razor, because these are things that we cannot currently explain, and we don't explain them by introducing something else we can't explain. Something else that has, we don't know how it works, we don't know where it came from. It breaks the rules that we're trying to work with. And then it does nothing for us. It just complicates the argument. Sure, it might give you some emotional comfort that somebody's in charge of all this insaneness that we see in the universe, but it violates Occam's razor. It adds stuff we don't need, and it just complicates the conversation, all without evidence, all without any type of justification. So could a God be true and be there? I don't know. Maybe, sure. I'll grant just at least a possibility. It might be possible, but I have no idea whether it's actually true or not. The same thing with the questions that you presented. So the best thing to do is just reduce the number of assumptions that we're working off of as much as we can. Allow us the ability to say we don't know for things that we don't know, and just work through the problem one step at a time. And that's what scientists do.
Yep.
Not me. I'm too busy.
Yeah, that's really good. And I do want to.
Sorry, go ahead.
What was that?
I said that's what scientists do, but not me.
I'm in the land.
I'm too busy forgetting video game character names. There's a delay. Sorry, I'm stepping on you. Go ahead.
Right, I was going to say. No, I was going to say I'm in the land of gaming here. There's a PC gaming room on every corner here in South Korea, but that's not. I didn't get any of your references earlier. But
Right.
But anyway, it does kind of. I do want to say it does seem like some of this, if let's just assume for a second that I was true, it would answer some of the questions, like, because you read kind of like the Old Testament or whatever, and you're like, man, this guy's a dick, man. I can say that like as a Christian, and it kind of maybe makes some kind of sense for someone a being who's evolving and maybe making mistakes along the way. And I'm not saying I believe in this at all, because I really don't know what to believe as far as but it would seem to answer some of the questions as far as maybe God making errors or acting inconsistently. Because if you're to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm agreeing with you. Go ahead. But
sorry, yeah, there is a delay because South Korea, but because people point out inconsistencies or immorality, and I think any being is bound to be, in a state of evolution and evolving and trying to be a better version of themselves, and this would answer some of those problems. But I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of me just pulling stuff out of thin air, just trying to. In my mind, trying to rationalize some of this stuff that
it's a good thing that you are self-aware to say, hey, these things that these solutions that I'm conjuring are really just guesses, just speculation, working with this data that we have. Because just the same way that I will say that, I'll simply grant the possibility of a God, but I got good reason to believe that it's not the God of the Bible as the Bible describes. You get it a little bit closer to the realm of reality by saying, well, maybe this God is he's just learning. He's like childlike. He's making mistakes as he goes, and he's growing. And sure, that's an explanation. Christians and the Jews won't like that, but it's an explanation. And then I can come in and say, hey, you know what? And this is my favorite type of hypothesis along the lines of you. What if God is just a massive fucking troll? Maybe God is the type of God that's like, you know what? I want to create beings so that I can trick them because, man, the idea of tricking beings is just so amazingly awesome to me that is like the highest virtue
Right.
possible is to pull the wool over off people's eyes. So I'm going to make a universe, use naturalistic processes to populate it with beings and entities. I'm then going to guide these holy books to be written that are all conflicting, go against nature and science and what's going on there. And I want to trick as many people as possible with these books because, boy, that just really tickles my jollies. That's an explanation. It's as well
Yeah.
supported as your explanation, which is, not supported at all, but it's an explanation. It's possible. So and to me, the whole thing is just a wash. Those hypotheses, the idea that the God of the Bible is actually real and true, I lump it all in there because they're possibilities, but it's just all a wash because the Bible is such a poor piece of evidence to demonstrate any of this, and the Bible is so poorly executed as a book that it is not useful for establishing what's actually real, especially in the face of all the other
No,
real
I
observations we
actually
can make using science. Go ahead. Sorry.
I actually agree with that 100%. And but the thing is, I'll just piggyback off what you're saying 1 second, and then because I don't really have too much to add. But I do want to say, because I have thought about that. I mean, I was an atheist, as I said, for many years myself, and I had something of a Pauline experience where God did speak to me, and I became a Christian. That happened about 11 years ago. But some Muslims or whatever, they question that, and they say, well, what about these people's experiences? Well, one, I say I can only speak on my experience. So what a Hindu or Muslim or Buddhist experience is, I have nothing to comment on that one way or the other, because I could just tell you, I could go off of what I've experienced, But one, I don't know if that, let's just say, whatever, Allah is the real God. What I experienced with Jesus talking to me could have just been some jinn or false god or the devil or some technology that I don't understand. So all I can go off of is, what I've experienced, as I said, one, but two is like, there's no real way for me to verify that one way or the other. You know what I mean? Like exactly what you just said. I mean, I think Christians want to apply that standard to everyone else is wrong. Every other holy book is wrong. We're totally 100% right. There's no room for error or, doubt, but we get a free 100% pass. And I do think it's double standards that I think too many Christians have.
Yeah, and I think
but that's really all I got for you.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to add on to that, you mentioned like confirmation about these types of explanations, and confirmation is great and all, but seeking confirmation actually isn't really the best way to do it. And that's why science is so effective as compared to like religious studies, is that, or theological studies rather, is that science works on the principle or the strategy of falsification rather than confirmation. So for instance, like in our previous call, when we were talking to, Isaiah, or I'm sorry, no, you're Isaiah, Ulrich.
I'm Isaiah.
Yeah, you're Isaiah.
Forrest.
We're talking to Ulrich. So talking to Ulrich is
Forrest.
yeah. But
joke.
Falsification is, yeah, I know. Falsification is just is a better strategy because you can find all kinds of reasons why you're right about something. And falsification is a little harder because you have to ask yourself, if I was wrong about this hypothesis, what would tell me that? And then go find that. If you fail to find that, then you didn't necessarily confirm your premise, but you at least failed to falsify it. And now you can find some other falsification criteria and keep on going. And if you continue to not find falsification for your premise, then chances are your premise is true. It doesn't confirm it. In science, we call it colloquially, or not colloquially, but colloquially call it, it's confirmed by the findings. But what it really means is it was failed to be falsified by the findings. And to tie all that together, you need to be on the lookout for unfalsifiable claims. And that comes down to claims of the supernatural, claims of God. Currently, we have no way to falsify these ideas. We can, by definition, only find ways to confirm them. And the fact that we can only find ways to confirm them and all of these superstitious claims conflict with each other, they can't be true according to our logic, then we know that strategy is not effective at actually determining which one of these are true or which one of these are false. So whenever you're dealing with like a claim about a god or a claim about how the universe began, ask yourself, if we were wrong about this, how do we know? And go find that. Go ahead.
I do have to say that is one of the most brilliant, like 1 minute I think I've ever heard in my life. Not the most. Don't flatter yourself, but that was amazing, man. I really, really appreciate that. I'm going to spend some time thinking about that for the rest of the week.
All right. I'm just regurgitating the words of better people. So we stand on the shoulders of giants. But go ahead. And I appreciate the compliment there.
Thank you, gentlemen.
No problem, Isaiah. You have a good day. And Forrest, any closing comments? I don't want to shut you out there.
Yeah. No, this was an easy call for me. you knocked it out of the park. It was perfect.
Cool. All right, Isaiah.
All right, gentlemen. Have a good one.
Yep. Yeah, you too.
Bye. Don't tell me what to do.
All righty. I messaged my wife on my text message here to grab me a water, please. And I accidentally messaged my dad's girlfriend instead. And she's like, what are you talking about, water, please? But anyway, okay. Let's go to another caller. Any final thoughts on that call there for us? Anything you want to close out with?
No, I'm kind of like I remember the only thing I'm still hung up on is I'm a theist because of an experience that may or may not be attributed to alcohol. That's kind of like I hope that Isaiah takes time to really just sit with that, and just really think through what that would actually mean if indeed that was the way that God decided to communicate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's we could have got into that where it's like, okay, well, how does your experience and Isaiah did say that, hey, I don't want to like comment on other people's experiences, but it is something you want to look at is like, why is your experience different somehow than other experiences that are very similar to yours? Dreams, hallucinations, visions, feelings, yet they supposedly indicate a conflicting, a contradictory conclusion than what you're drawing from yours. And we could have, started talking about why are we rejecting those? What makes yours better than theirs? How do you convince that person that their experience is not genuine and yours is? There's all kinds of like paths we could have taken on that. But
I thought you were doing great. I didn't want to jump in and just ramble for 45 minutes. I thought Isaiah was being very polite, and you were doing just fine. You're killing it.
He was. I'm getting comments in the chat that my volume is low. I hope it's not low. I'm not sure, but we'll see.
Sound good to me.
I'll move my microphone closer so we can really get intimate here. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and go on to the next person. We have Jeffrey. Jeffrey, him from North Dakota. Jeffrey's a theist. His question is, what's your opinion on whether theists and atheists can find common ground / coexist? I'll answer that really quick. I think theists and atheists do already find common ground and do already coexist. So maybe, do you want to elaborate on that question, Jeffrey? Because I think we're already at that state, albeit imperfect.
Yeah,
we're at that state.
Sorry, I hope my truck isn't too loud in here.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
As long as you're not driving.
Oh, I'm on Bluetooth, so I'm good.
Yeah, you're good.
I don't know if do we allow that on the channel is the question, because I don't want to do much, but we do have channel rules.
There. I think it's fine if he's using Bluetooth, then I think it's probably okay.
Okay, sweet, we're good to go.
Yeah, I'm on Bluetooth, and honestly, I'll be parking in less than a minute. So
sick.
All right.
Yeah, so I guess my question, obviously, we do coexist currently, and we've coexisted for thousands of years, right? And it's been that way. But I guess to elaborate on the question, I guess where do you see the trend going? Like, do you feel like it's a 70-30 split in the future, or do you feel like we're going towards secular society? Do you feel like there's just kind of ebbs and flows? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, for me, I definitely know that like atheism or just clicking the non-religious box is on the rise. However, also Christian nationalism is on the rise in this country. And so like, it's kind of difficult insofar as like, how do we continue coexisting when you do have one side, we have call-in shows like this. The most aggressive we are is that we invite people to call in and tell us why they believe things, and we might get a little spicy. That's our aggression. And on the other side, we've got someone's religion means that you don't get to access medical care, or you can't be the gender you are, or you're not allowed to be married to the person you love. And so like that's kind of an issue for me. And that's where I would imagine the split, if there is going to be a split, is going to come from. But I think that as long as people in power can continue splitting people based on religion, those people in power will remain in power. And so hopefully it'll be for the benefit of all of us if we can find a way to work together a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. No, I described myself to your call screener. I think it was Stephanie as I described myself as a lousy theist. I went to Catholic school for 12 years growing up, and I graduated, and then I stopped because I had some qualms with it after I graduated in college, stopped going to church, didn't really ever have any desire to, married my wife, and she made me a Lutheran. So, and I'm a member of a denomination that's probably seen as a pretty liberal denomination in the U.S. But I still think I harbor some of that theistic tendency. So it's good to hear you guys talk about, and use these respectful, rhetoric and be able to handle these questions, because I think, obviously it's going to go on for a long time where, religion and faith is not going to go away, but we do need to come to terms where it's not dogmatic. And for me, it isn't dogmatic. That's why I call myself a lousy theist.
Gotcha. Yeah, and just put my 2 cents in. I'm pretty much in alignment with everything Forrest said. I think our progress as a society with regard to religious versus non-religious, or atheist versus theist, or let's better put as theist versus non-theist. And then it's like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back type thing. So I think generally the world is heading in the right direction, but we're going to have hiccups in the process. Forrest mentioned the nuns, NONEs, in the United States is on the rise. It's on a record rise. I think within the next few decades, it's going to be a majority. If not already a majority, I don't know. Or it might be like a super majority.
I don't think it is now.
Yeah, but it's heading that direction. But then on the other hand, you look at statistics like when it comes to Islam, Islam is just simply outpopulating the other world's religions. By 2050, Islam's going to be the top dog religion on the planet. So it's and then Forrest also mentioned Christian nationalism, and we see other countries like say like Iran back in like the 70s and 80s, which was like fairly non-religious society. They had religion and everything like that, but it wasn't like a theocratic takeover of everything and turn it into what it is today. So we see back and forwards, ebbs and flows. Hopefully over time it's going the right direction. If you compare us now to medieval Europe, I think we've definitely made a huge improvement since then. So hopefully in another 1,500 or 1,000 years, we can our reverse ancestors, our descendants, will look back and say, hey, we're way better than those folks back in the 2000s, and so that's all I can hope. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I do this, because I want to put my little bit of weight behind that and push the ball in that direction.
Yeah. Sure. No, I appreciate you guys having these discussions. And, for me, my theism is kind of it's a community-based thing. I live in a small North Dakota town, and, everyone around here generally, has that as their past, their family. They've brought them along in this religious, environment. And that's kind of why I do it. Luckily, with my liberal/leftist views, my church generally kind of leans that way. And I guess you mentioned something about Islam kind of growing and becoming the dominant denomination over the next decades.
Yeah,
there's the question of that I've seen research, or I guess not research, but discussion about the new atheists, and kind of like people like Sam Harris, and I wish I could come up with another name off the top of my head here, but they kind of used their new atheism and the free speech aspect of that to then become Islamophobic. I have never heard you guys, or I guess I should say Forrest, because I don't know much of your work otherwise, but I've never heard Forrest use his atheism as an Islamophobic attack. Do you see that resurging, or is that kind of coming and gone?
Yeah, I do want to clarify. I know this isn't your point, but I try to draw a distinction between like Arab phobic or Muslim phobic. and Islamophobic, because like that's the big thing. Like, fuck Islam. I'll say fuck Islam all day, and I'll excoriate Islam the same way that I excoriate Christianity. But you're right. To your point, again, I know this is what you're saying. Like, yeah, this a lot of these people would be Muslim phobic, where they're actually angry at Muslims in general, or Arab phobic, where just any Arab culture, which, you know, Arab culture is like saying Asian culture or white culture. It's like, this is, what the hell does that mean? There's 1,000 different people here, you know, or different cultures here. And so like they would just kind of, and you see that now when you know, Dawkins is talking about being a cultural Christian. And what that really means is he just wants to live in white society with white people, you know what I mean? And it just sucks. So I don't know.
Yeah. I was disappointed in that the turn that apparently is happening there. There's more people that are saying that cultural Christian thing too, and I don't quite understand it. But we, yes, humans like to essentialize and you know, put ourselves into boxes. So I guess I can't blame them.
Yeah, I think
I guess I can blame them. I should say I do kind of blame them, because I don't agree with it as a Christian myself. I don't think that. I do think it's a proxy for just saying, yeah, white culture, basically.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you for, you know, I know you said you're, what was the term you used about your theism? You said you were a
lousy theist.
Lousy theist. Kudos for you for being a lousy theist, because, you know, there is biblical support for that type of thinking, that for the dominance of one nation over another just because a God says so, or for the ownership of other human beings, or for the subjugation and objectification of women, things that we see, you know, Christian nationalists cling to that do have justification in the Bible. But thankfully, you as a lousy theist, if we got into it, me and Forrest might have hangups about why you believe the theism part, you're at least human enough and holding on to humanity enough to say, hey, you know what? I don't agree with these things despite what my book says. So kudos to you for about that.
Right.
There's a new video. I haven't watched it completely yet. I think I'm only about halfway through it, but over on Genetically Modified Skeptics channel, I think his latest video is on why the anti-woke right has so many atheists. And it talks a little bit about what you were talking about with the new atheists, which we don't really use that term much anymore. I don't think. And I know new atheist is still a term. A lot of people still use it, but usually in atheist circles, none of us are identifying ourselves as new atheists to each other or to others. We can talk about the good things that the Four Horsemen did back in the early 2000s. We could talk about some of the bad stuff that they're doing now. Not all of them, but you know, they're just people. They're not like our leaders or anything like that. So, but we're not really calling ourselves new atheists or anything, or even like atheism plus, I think was like a term for a while. That's just the phases that the kind of the zeitgeist of it kind of went through, you know, and as we figure things out, as we get better at things. So not that we're offended you use the term or anything like that, just let you know that that's kind of, we don't use that internally. I fist on the table. Don't do that. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, if you don't mind, it's been a delightful conversation so far. And I think all of our callers dropped because I know one said in the chat that our call with Isaiah answered his question, so he left. So Jeffrey, you're the only guy we got right now. So I'd like to maybe draw out this call a little bit. You said you're a theist, and you said you're a lousy theist. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what do you call what do you define as theism, and why you identify as that? If you don't mind.
I guess I'm in my mid 30s, and I guess I've got some growing to do. I mean, throughout your whole life, you like even the previous caller said he was an atheist at some point, and then he had a vision or talked to God, which I've never had that.
Or
I guess that's maybe why my lousy. Was he drunk? Is that what he said?
Isn't that what he said? He said it could have been attributed to gin.
Oh,
did I say that?
Maybe I'm misremembering.
Oh my gosh. Well. No, that's all right. Well, I guess no, but yeah, I guess the point is that there's changes in every individual human that you could decide one moment to be a Christian even though you've been an atheist your whole life. But for me, it's just kind of been a baseline, I guess. Like, I believe in God. Like I said, I kind of fell out of it when I graduated high school, and didn't go for many years. Didn't really care. Didn't really imagine myself ever going back to church, but then I met my wife, and we made a family, and she was going to church as a Lutheran, and I saw in Lutheranism, specifically the ELCA, a much more open and welcoming place than I ever saw in the Roman Catholic Church here in my town. And that's not to say that, you know, all the Roman Catholics here are worse than me or better than me or whatever you want to say, but it just was more, it fit more with my personality and who I am and what I believe, and I've stuck with it since then. You know, I've served as congregational president. I helped us through COVID, kind of guiding the congregation on how to act and what to think about COVID. There was a lot of people who were vehemently anti-mask during that time, and I was like, yeah, no, we just need to follow the health guidelines, right? So I guess my theism is just like a baseline belief in God that I haven't lost, I guess was how I would describe it.
Okay, so
Gotcha.
baseline
I
belief
also
in
need
God.
to clarify. I need to correct myself. The chat has let me know that he meant Jinn, DJINN, like a genie, like an evil spirit.
A genie.
I was distracted
Oh my
and
gosh.
did not hear. Yeah, I was distracted and I didn't hear him right, and I just kind of let it go. And I thought it was a whole different thing. Never mind. I'm an asshole, and I apologize. Is the point of that?
Well, I have
Isaiah-
I have also not had a genie talk with, I don't know, like have God talk through me.
Try drinking enough gin, and you might.
Yeah, Isaiah, if you're still listening, next time you mention your story, specifically pronounce it Dujin, so we know. Sorry.
Or just get a host that isn't a distracted douchebag that isn't paying attention to 3 different things at the time. Yeah,
hey, it makes me feel better about my my Ulfric gaff there.
Yeah.
But okay, so you mentioned, Jeffrey, that we asked you about your theism, and you came to the answer, which I appreciate, that you just simply have a baseline belief in God, and then you mentioned about all the positive things that you've either done or experienced in the church. Let's try to divorce those things for a moment, not to invalidate either of them, just to divorce them, because like your belief in a God and the experiences with the church aren't necessarily related or dependent on each other, because you can have people who go to a church and they have a terrible experience, but they still believe in the God. Or you can have people go to another church and they have a great experience, but then they're like, this God obviously doesn't exist. So that baseline belief in a God, were you raised in a theist family? Were you taught that from infancy? Is that something you picked up later on?
Honestly, no, honestly, my parents, didn't really show it to me at all. They just sent me to Catholic school here. And that's where I never really asked, to be honest with you. I never really asked. I would assume, like, kind of similar to me, like they're not like weekly churchgoers, and they actually never have been, even while they were sending me to, Catholic school. It was more my aunt who kind of guided me along that way. But my parents probably very similar to me as far as just have that belief. It's just how they've grown up, how my grandparents, their parents, taught them. But I think they probably think about it a lot less than I do.
That's interesting. If that's accurate, she just told you to believe because it's just a good thing? Or did she tell you to believe because she thinks it's true herself?
I think it's honestly probably, I would have to, I don't want to, put words in her mouth, but probably just because it's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds very, very typical, honestly. Just like this is just the way that things are done. This is what goodness is. This is what good people do. This is the good book, blah, blah, blah. And it just kind of becomes this cultural habit that just gets passed on like cutting the ends off a ham.
Yeah. And as on your side, as benign as that is with your experience, Jeffrey, I've actually seen that be weaponized, that type of reasoning be weaponized in the Jehovah's Witnesses. Whenever somebody is questioning or thinking about leaving or discussing leaving, if they're capable of doing that with family members without getting shunned immediately, when those conversations do occur, almost always the point is brought up, the faulty point that, well, if you leave, where will you go? You'll never find another organization as loving as this one or as supportive as this one. The world out there wants to eat you alive. And I've seen that type of reasoning be weaponized against people who are dishonestly doubting and honestly saying to themselves, hey, this is not my thing. So I guess my question to you is, do you think that that's a good reason to believe? Or does it not really matter? And if it's not a good reason to believe, do you want to find a better reason to believe? Anyway, go ahead.
No, I guess, sorry, just to clarify what you're asking, is it a good reason to believe
Yeah. Do you
by
think that is
just
a good reason
just
to
the virtue of
believe?
it being good, or
Yeah.
just
Do
like
you
the
think
fact
that's
that
a
you might?
good?
What else will you do?
Yeah. Like that is my question. Like, do you think that the statement, well, it's just a good thing for you? Do you think that's a good reason to believe something?
I guess as an abstract concept of like, believing something in general, probably. I guess, gosh, it's separating it from religion versus just life in general.
Yeah.
I think, oh man, that's a tough question. It's a really good question. It's probably not a good reason, to be honest with you, but I would rationalize it by saying that it's just kind of human nature. We are constantly trying to rationalize what we believe, or what we believe, what we think, why we think it, and some people are just better at it than others, I guess. And as long as you're not harming others, in my opinion,
Yeah.
I think that it's a good path to take, I guess I'd say.
I do mostly agree with your statements there in that, yeah, if it's a benign thing, and if somebody believes and it's a super benign thing, it doesn't cause them to do shitty things to people or to ostracize their children or any of these other things. I'm generally okay with it. I'll have my disagreements with the whys and the process and stuff like that, but like like I said, you're a lousy theist. So like yeah, I'm pretty good with that. That's a good live and let live thing. In fact, like right now, going back to your original question, we're finding that common ground even in this call because, like, as long as you're not harming somebody, and this is the value you hold as well, as long as you're not harming somebody, I can live with what you believe, even though I'm not agree with it, and we can have like a civilized conversation around like talking about these things.
Right.
But I can actually raise you a counterexample though, because I can think of. And one last thing too, I do agree that humans tend to gravitate towards things that are offer really good utility, like when it comes to like emotional comfort and other things. Um, I guess my next question would be: do you care if your beliefs are true or not, or do you care more whether they have utility or not?
Honestly, if it came tomorrow and there was oh god, how would I even describe it? Like if there's a white paper that came out that said God's not real, I wouldn't. I wouldn't like fall apart, I guess would be what I would say. I think it's more utilitarian. Like I said, it's more communal. It's a community based thing, especially where I live. Most people here are Christian. And I really enjoy being around a lot of these people, and family members, friends, churchgoers, congregants, things like that. So,
yeah, and that's the thing. That's why I specifically mentioned earlier about divorcing the idea of your theism from your religious church activities, because you could be an atheist and still participate in those things. You might have to make some compromises and find a new balance there, but nothing stops you from going to church with your family or participating in those activities. You don't have to actually be a theist to do those things. You can find some compatibility there, and some people have. So other people tried, and they find that it's not their thing. But there's nothing impossible about doing that. So I guess let me ask you this question here then: if you had a sealed envelope in front of you, and inside of it was the answer to whether a God exists or not. So you currently believe a God exists. And your reasons are: I find utility in it. I have a good community around it. My current position is actually very beneficial for my happiness and my health and my life. And inside that envelope is the real answer. And that real answer might be, no, there's not a God. Would you open that envelope or would you leave it there and walk away?
I probably, that's tough. A really interesting
you don't have to answer
hypothesis or hypothetical.
You don't have to answer it now. It might just be some food for thought as you go into your evening after the call. But you may want to ask yourself that, because that'll tell you where your values are stronger than your other values. Because I personally, I like to think that let's say let's flip the script. Okay, let's say that my life as an atheist is actually pretty damn good, if I do say so myself. Like, it's way better back when I was a theist. Not perfect. I have my problems. I'm 43. My health is starting to deteriorate. My hair is starting to go gray. I'm getting wrinkles and aches and pains. Like, my life's not perfect. But as an atheist and as a skeptic and as somebody who has, without sounding pretentious, intellectual agility in the way that I handle the world, I'm very happy with where I'm at. So now if I had that envelope in front of me, and that envelope might have the answer inside, yes, God is real, or worse, yeah, yes, the Christian God is real. Would I want to open it? My answer is probably yes, because I value knowing true things. As Matt says, I value knowing as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible over my own emotional comfort, over how I want to feel. So I would probably open that envelope. But that's not necessarily saying that you should too. It's your answer is up to you, and it's based on your values. So that might be something you might want to think about. Go ahead.
Yeah, honestly, I lean towards opening it because I am the same way. I would want to, I want to know as many true things rather than my own comfort. I guess
Cool.
my hesitance was probably, it's kind of like a holistic, thing. My hesitance was holistic in that would I be able to share that with my community? Would they accept it? What would their reaction be? That was kind of my hesitance. For me personally, I would open it, but I would worry about the chaos that might ensue for the people who have these rigid beliefs. Yeah.
Absolutely. If I were to open that envelope and it says the Christian God exists, I'd be like, holy shit, what do I do now? Like, what's going on? Like, yeah, it would throw my life into chaos. But despite that, I value knowing the truth more than my comfort. And we're in alignment on that. You say you lean that direction. I think that's great. So taking that now, and then your statement earlier about how you are a believer because of the utility that it provides you, you may want to go back and reanalyze that reason and say to yourself, okay, is this really the reason that I want to stick with? Has this reason maybe diminished after this conversation we just had? And if yes, do you have a better reason? Or perhaps you have no reasons at all. And that might be something for you to think about. So we actually have some new callers in the queue. So let's wrap this up. Jeffrey, you any closing comments? Anything you want to say before we let you go?
No, very, very delightful call. Appreciate all the insight, and it was very enjoyable.
Okay, great.
Sweet. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day,
All
Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Bye. I would only my biggest issue is we talk about benign religious belief and all these things.
Yeah.
It's like a benign tumor. At the end of the day, it is still a tumor. And there's still a problem there. And so I think Jeffrey's a good guy. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with Jeffrey was saying. I'm not trying to make an enemy out of Jeffrey. I would continue down the path of saying if somebody can make you believe something absurd, they can make you commit something atrocious. They can make you do something horrible. And while I don't think that Jeffrey would fall for that kind of shit, as he was talking about, trying to convince the people in his church to wear masks and to participate in society and things like that, that's all very good. You're still requiring you all of this is still requiring you to have a different kind of thinking for one thing than you for everything else. And maybe that works for some people. Maybe that works for some people, but it doesn't work for me, and it scares me when that's the thing.
I agree and value those points you made. And if I had it my way, if I could wave a magic wand or talk to a djinn and get a wish granted, I would say I want to see through non-violent, non-terrible means, religion just be eradicated off of the planet. I would love that. Would be my preferred option. But I got to deal with practical reality and understand that while that's a noble goal, I think, and that's what I want to see, chances are we will probably never, ever, ever accomplish that. So I'll take the next best thing. And that's if religion's got to be present, I want it to be benign. And yes, you make a good point that, religion can make you do stupid things, but at that point it's no longer benign.
Right.
Your tumor analogy is apt because a tumor can be benign and then all of a sudden get ugly on you, I think, pretty quick. So so that's kind of like where idealism butts up against the practical world and making compromises. So as we can coexist as Jeffrey was asking us. So, but cool. Okay. Well, anyway, sorry to dominate that call there. I think
not at all. I've been really enjoying. I've been kind of just letting you go because I think you're making great points, and it's a certain point where I'm just going to be everything Eric said. There's no reason for me to just kind of center myself if I have nothing to add. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. If I'm talking too much, just raise your hand. And say,
Not, I think you're doing great. I think you're doing great.
Pull it back a little.
This is how usually I'm the one who's just rambles forever, and I don't think you're rambling inerrant or unnecessarily. Right. I think you're filling the space quite well. So I'm just I'm happy to just chill here and listen for a minute.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, I've noticed like I can have like highs and lows, not necessarily like depression, bipolarism, but I will have high days and low days. And today's I'm kind of at peak here, so I'm feeling good.
I feel the exact. I know exactly what you mean, and I am definitely more relaxed today than I usually. When I come in a show, I'm like hypey and like everything, and now I'm kind of. I just got done with 30 different projects. I've got so much other stuff going on. I'm happy to just sit here and just. All right, is this God real?
Like,
why not?
We're kind of like sign and cosine right now. You know, like I'm signing your cosine.
Yeah, we're vibing.
Yeah, we're balancing. Balancing out. Yeah.
Love that instead of like yin or yang or whatever else you could have said. Sine and cosine. That's
sine and cosine are way
cooler
than yin and yang. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's get another individual in here. We have 4 people in the queue still. That's great. We went from a bunch to 0. So okay, we have
weird. We had like 3 theists drop all at once. It's crazy.
Yeah. I just looked over and I was like, did something happen to the system? Because that usually happens when there's like a malfunction. Catherine, welcome. Catherine, pronouns she, her, Pennsylvania. Catherine's an atheist. Hi. The note here says, deconstructing. How can you approach science without falling into dogma and pseudoscience? This is a Forrest question all over here.
Hi.
Do you want me to expand on that question?
Yes. Yeah, I want to know where exactly you're coming from so I can tailor my answer to you.
Sure. So I have been on a deconstruction path for a while, but I think I'm only just newly realizing and like opening up to that I have a really poor foundation in science, and I have several friends that are in, like, I previously would have said are very scientific minded, but I'm kind of figuring out slowly that they're very into kind of pseudoscience type things. And so I feel like I am kind of walking into wanting to understand science, but not having any sort of foundation to tell the difference between what is good information and what is like not good information. That would be kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So I'm taking some notes here, and what I think the biggest thing for you, because like this kind of thinking comes along with like getting like an education in science, but that's not a reasonable request to make of somebody. Just go take a bunch of fucking science classes and you'll figure it out. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So like the biggest thing that I would say for you is like there's a lot of clear warning signs of pseudoscience, and you can see them when you really compare what scientific thinking is or isn't. So like in good scientific thinking, you're going to see somebody who is ruling out hypotheses. They're not just saying a thing. They're testing like, okay, well, if this is true, then I should be able to see this and that. And is that in fact what I'm seeing? Is it, here's something that I don't understand. Let's figure out every possible explanation and see what we can narrow down. They understand the difference between correlation and causation. There was lightning and then the cup fell out of my cabinet. Does that mean that the lightning spirit knocked the cup down, or is there something else going on there? Falsifiability and replicability are big ones. We get people who talk about like simulations and stuff, and it's like, oh well, how do you know that maybe God's outside of space and time in a place where you can't access him? And I'll say, okay, well, how would you possibly be able to tell that that's not real? And replicability as well. Like if I can, a common misconception about like, say for example, evolution. Well, evolution isn't replicable. Sure, you can't go back and rewatch evolution, but the individual pieces of building the theory are replicable. In the same way that like a murder trial isn't replicable. I can't go watch this person get murdered 3 times again and again, but to make sure I replicated the experiment. But I can replicate individual parts, the experimentation that leads me into forensic science. Those are all replicable things. If somebody's making extraordinary claims, do they have evidence to back that claim? Or do they have evidence that is not at the level of the claim? Or do they have no evidence whatsoever? If I tell you that I had Red Lobster for dinner last night, that the level of evidence required could be as little as my testimony, as much as maybe the receipt. You know, maybe I have some leftovers in the box. You could analyze my poops. You know, whatever you want to do. Like there's a million options there. Or if I tell you that I can, you know, bounce on my penis like a pogo stick and reach to the moon, you're gonna need a little bit more than my word for it to really understand whether or not that's true. And that leads you into the kind of Occam's razor side of things, where like if somebody's saying something that's really, really big and grandiose, and you have somebody who could be saying like, you know, like the one call we took of you know, there being seashells on mountains. Well, what's an answer for that? You know, one of them is a global flood. That's a very expensive claim. The other one is kids throwing fossils up there because they're fucking bored. That is not likely at all, but it is much more likely, and it takes many less assumptions than this worldwide flood, which contradicts everything we know about nature, about geology, about how water works, about how evolution works. And so I would say be on the lookout. If someone's, you know, kind of like keep those concepts, those like major hallmarks of scientific thinking in mind. And when your friends are talking to you about things that they are claiming are real, be on the lookout for big exaggerated claims. If they overuse, especially if somebody who's claiming to be a scientist overuses the word proof, because science is about evidence, not proof. And so like colloquially, I might say this is pretty well proven, but if they're really like, it's been proven that drinking 3 cups of peanut butter a day will eliminate your prostate cancer. Like that's, if they're saying the word proof in something like that and making big exaggerated claims, that should be a red flag for you. If they're overusing, you know, Eric talked a little while ago about like ad hoc, what we call the immunization kind of thing of a claim where it's like, you know, if this is real, then it'll do this, and then it doesn't work, and they're like, oh, well, that's because this other thing, but it's actually still real, and like they just, you know, kind of add on layers and layers and layers of unsupported explanations and excuses for their beliefs. If they rely on anecdotes more than actual evidence, if it's, you know, my grandma's brother's uncle's mailman's dog is the one who told me about it, and I saw it on Facebook Reels and whatever else. If you notice that they're using a lot of like Jordan Peterson type of just like pseudo intellectual babble, where it's just like, can you not explain this like I'm fucking 5? Because if you can't, then I don't think you know it either. Those are all things that like I think should be warning signs for you. If somebody's trying to convince you of something and saying that they're leading you down the science road, and then they're taking you to a chiropractor who's like, it's been proven that I can pop your neck and cure your fucking GERD, and like it's all about nerve pressure, and actually it's all about these nociceptors in the splenius capitis, and that's why and it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? You know what I mean? And what I just said is specialized nerve cells for sensing pain in this one big banded muscle on your neck. And it doesn't fucking mean anything, but like somebody can say that and sound like they're real important, you know what I mean? And so just be on the lookout for those kind of red flags when people are talking to you, and try to highlight the actual hallmarks of good scientific discussion. And if they're missing those, or if they're hitting some of those red flags I've mentioned, then maybe it's time to tell that person to fuck off. Does that make sense, Catherine?
Yes. I wrote those down. Those are very helpful. I have a question about grandiose claims, because for me, not having a good background, actually, I think everything seems quite grandiose, scientific or not. So I think from kind of a very starting point for myself, it seems like I'm going to just be assuming some things that I read about or find out are right, and going from there. And that seems like the mistake that I made with religion, that I'm making these assumptions that certain things are true, but then they're not true. So I kind of am having trouble getting past that point. Although I want to say that the other things that you said, very helpful, and I will definitely keep those in mind.
Yeah, no worries. So the big thing is there's a difference between an argument from authority fallacy, where you're like, this one guy who's a physicist said the Big Bang is real, so it is, versus gaining information from a reputable source and saying like, okay, like this major physics organization, this physics textbook, this, whatever, these things are talking, not only just saying the words, the Big Bang is real, but explaining a little bit about it in a way that anybody can understand. If I'm talking about the Big Bang and I want to talk about like the regression rate of galaxies, I can then say we're talking about like galaxies we notice are moving farther and farther apart. And when we calculate the distance of the galaxies versus how fast they're moving, we notice that there's this trend where the farther away they are, the faster they're moving away. And so that tells us a little bit about the expansion of space. And we can also plot that data on a graph, and we come up with a remarkably straight line, and that's called Hubble's constant. And that Hubble's constant gives us Hubble's law, which tells us about the Big Bang. And like those, I can break this down in a way that like you don't have to be a physicist to understand just the basics of why we think this way, even if you don't know everything, even if you don't know the details of the theory, right? And so if you have somebody who's talking to you and it's like, okay, I don't know anything about evolution, but here's this guy who calls himself a biologist, who has all sorts of fancy little letters after his name, and he's telling me that that eyeballs are so complicated they couldn't have possibly evolved, therefore evolution isn't true. Fuck. Okay, I don't know anything about this. So here's an argument from authority: is I can say, okay, well, this guy's a biologist, so he says it's not real, so I guess it isn't. And then I have this other guy who's a biologist, and he says it is real. So now I'm completely lost. I don't know what to. So now I can go look up a bio textbook. I can go look up. I don't know about other universities, but I know like Oklahoma University has like a whole thing, because we live in the buckle of the Bible Belt here where I'm at. They have like a whole page dedicated to this is why we accept evolution. Here's what the evidence is. Here's why we don't teach creationism here, because that's not fucking science. I can go to like any like major biological association. I can talk to look at like the Anthropological Association or the medical association or whatever like that, and see clear statements where people talk about. I can go to Google Scholar and just type in the word evolution and see a few things. If somebody says the eye couldn't have evolved, I can find papers that talk about the evolution of the eye. Even if I can't read those papers, even if I can't comprehend them, I know that they're there, and I can check to make sure the journals they're published in are peer reviewed, and that the universities that those people work at are legitimate. And I can say, okay, these guys know some shit that I don't, and now I can decide, do I want to dig into this further? And so that's what I would recommend, is just like kind of learn what logical fallacies are and how they work, and know that you are not immune to them. Get OpenStax, get LibreTexts, which are free online textbooks that are really great introductory level stuff that you can kind of start hitting the glossary on those things. And like if somebody says something you don't understand and you're not sure if you should believe them, you can hit the index on OpenStax.com or on LibreText, and you can see what actual scientists are saying about these things. Those are great ways that you can get past the kind of like credulity hump, so to speak, and decide whether or not this is something you actually want to dedicate your time to thinking is real, if that makes any sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I think I forget the phrase that you just used, but it was very accurate about kind of being incredulous about everything. You can't move forward at all if that's the case. But yeah, I think I have had a very strong distrust of all scientific everything coming from my religious standpoint, and so even the idea of biology association or anthropology association, my immediate inside response is like, well, those are just people that are probably making things up. But the new frame I'm trying to have is that that's probably unlikely. These people are like, it's many people who are studying things. There's not really a reason for them to make all of this up. So slowly, I'm trying to be able to figure out what good sources are. Yeah.
So I'm putting in the chat right now. I just put openstacks.org in there, and you can go there, and it is free textbooks, college level textbooks. I believe OpenStax is out of Rice University, if I remember correctly. And so these are, I've actually got one right behind me. You can read them all for free online, or you can buy a physical copy. This is a psychology textbook from OpenStax because I had some psychology questions, and so I just bought this was $40. And so they're remarkably affordable when you want to buy one, but you can also access them all for free online. And then I also put LibreText there, which is another one. I have actually used both OpenStax and LibreText as actual college textbooks when I got my start at Tulsa Community College. And that was these assigned textbooks for like biology, for chemistry, for physics, for like all these things, because they wanted to make it affordable and accessible to everybody. And so they used these textbooks for them. And also I would look into, like, if you have questions about this stuff, look up like how these things relate to other parts of your life. Like if you're worried, if you're dealing with that thing of like, okay, well, all these scientists are brainwashed by this atheistic worldview, and they, if you question the paradigm at a university, you're going to get fired. So they have this financial incentive to push the lie of evolution and the age of the earth and all the kind of just general talking points that you get from science deniers and conspiracy theorists and whatnot that work really well when you're pushing on religious people. Check out just how these things relate to other sciences. So if I want to learn about evolution, I don't know anything about how evolution works, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know if this is true. This is a really big claim. Well, I can find out that evolution is like the main reason why medicine works. The reason I need a different flu shot every year is because of evolution. The reason we know what we know about like developmental disorders or about congenital disorder, or genetics, or like this, all of these things come down to our evolutionary understanding, especially when we look at like development. I'm like, okay, well, this guy's got a hole in his heart. What does that mean? Well, it's because of this developmental pathway, and here's the evolution behind that. And like it actually ties in, and it makes us better at medicine. I like food. And every time I go to the grocery store, I know that every single thing there is the result of artificial selection, which is a mechanism of evolution. So like if I eat an apple and it's this big, sweet, delicious thing the size of my fist, and not a tiny, weird, bitter thing that's a wild what an apple actually looks like in nature, then okay, that's an evolutionary thing. You have a dog or a cat that's a different breed and a different hair color and everything than my neighbor. That's because of artificial selection. Kohlrabi, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower are all the same species of wild mustard plant that have been adapted into different ways by the process of artificial selection. That is evolution at work. So if I know that the entire industry of agriculture and the entire industry of medicine and the entire fossil fuel industry are all tied back to evolution being real and the earth being old, then like that means it kind of discredits the idea that these scientists are just wanting to get rich by pushing their religion on me, right? This is actually the reason why I'm able to live in the society that I'm able to live in today. This is something that is benefiting me every moment, whether I realize it or not. And so that kind of helps to quell that annoying voice in the back of your head that wants to be a conspiracy theorist and say like, yeah, maybe somebody's an asshole, because maybe they are. But like the fact that you're benefiting from it and the fact that it actually is something you can see in front of you, that for sure is helpful for a lot of people.
Catherine, if I can just coattail on what Forrest just said there. First of all, the fact that you're stopping yourself and being so self-aware about, you know what, I was duped by this religion before. I just blindly accepted what they say. I don't want to just leave and walk right into another bear trap like that, but it's under the umbrella of science or some other organization. Kudos to you for having that type of self-awareness and that caution.
Seriously.
I think that is something that is sorely lacking in the world. But here's what I recommend, because like I experienced the same dilemma as you did when I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, is because they reject that mankind is older than 6,000 years old. They reject evolution in general. They do think that God created the world in the the phases that Genesis describes, not necessarily with the days, because they have a very loose definition of day as just period of time. But anyway, stuff that conflicts directly with science and what science says. So I wanted to be careful that I wasn't just going to jump out and just walk right into another bear trap like that. And what Forrest says is really great, because science is a collection of people working towards finding truth, working towards coming to a better understanding of the world. So generally, you want to look at what the consensus of a scientific field says. And some people will say, well, that's just an appeal to an authority. Well, appeals to authority are bad if the person's not actually an authority in the matter, or you're just selecting one person out of a group of people and that one person disagrees with everybody or something like that. But even then, if that's not good enough for you, and that's totally fine if that's not good enough for you, there's a practical aspect to it, in that I only have so much time. I can't go out and study biology to figure out, determine like 100% for myself, yes, evolution is true and it happens. I have to trust the scientific consensus. That's because, and here's my last point before I'll let you respond. I can see what science produces and then passes to people like engineers, passes to people that apply it practically in the real world. And they take that information, those findings, and then they do stuff with it. For example, if I, let's say, were to doubt electrical theory, or I were to doubt logic, or I were to doubt even in certain cases like mechanical physics and such, I can take a look at not just how they developed it and how they researched it. I can maybe just stop and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to look into all those details because I only have so much time. I want to see what they're doing with it. And one good example of what I just mentioned is the computers right in front of us. So there's a computer in front of me. There's one in front of Forrest. You're probably at least on a cell phone, if not on a computer or a laptop. All the stuff that they discovered in science was put to practical application in the devices we use. If I want to convince myself that electrical theory is true, all I got to do is study my computer in front of me and understand how these things work. So with all that being said, you sound like you're interested in science. Is there a field of study that you're interested in, but you're wanting to be careful that you don't just fall into I'm listening to what these people say unthinkingly? Do you have an interest in science, and if you do, what field?
That's a good question. I think, well, first I want to say how both of you are describing things is very much how I'm thinking and what I'm trying to avoid or do better. So I appreciate your understanding my perspective quite well. I feel like I probably can't answer that question, because I think I just feel like I need to know everything at once, and if I don't know everything, then I don't know anything. So to get started or to pick one area feels quite, everything. I just need to know it all.
I can absolutely understand that dilemma, because it's science and knowledge is just such an interwoven thing where things cross over and there's cross-cutting findings that affect different fields. And I can understand the dilemma there, but you have to build a house starting with the foundation and one brick at a time. That's this simple reality of building something, and you're trying to build your knowledge base. So it's it may be, you may want to sit there and think, and maybe necessarily force yourself into saying, hey, I'm going to pick something and start looking at it. Don't worry about the details right now. Just pick something that calls to you. Like for me, it's computers and logic and physics and engineering. Like that's what calls to me, and that's what drew me in to learn these things. And now I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. I do computer programming, and I now study all these other things in my spare time. You have to start somewhere, because you're only one person. You have a limited amount of time, and your brain is only capable of doing so many things at once and retaining so much knowledge. You are just going to simply hit a practical point of, you're going to have to trust collections of people all forming consensuses around things. And if you don't, like I said, if you don't trust that, look at what they're doing with it. For example, if you were to sit back and say, hey, I want to be like Forrest and I want to go into biology, don't worry about what biologists are saying. look at what they're concluding and what they're finding, and then go out and see what they're doing with it. Go look into like vaccine research. Go look into genetics and how we're able to determine, like in court cases, whether DNA points to a specific person as the murderer, or whether or not the DNA can link us back to certain ancestors. Look at what they're doing with it as confirmation of the findings, because if the findings are incorrect, they're not going to be able to do jack squat with it. And if they can, then something's majorly wrong there, like something horrific. And the fact that we have so many levels of science and so many fields of science, and they're all doing really interesting and awesome things, and those things work, it's huge confirmation that the findings are at least close to accurate, or not necessarily 100% accurate. I don't think any scientist in their right mind anywhere says these findings are 100% accurate. They're always working to get closer to the truth, but there's always that grain of doubt in there that maybe something's off here, and if we find it, we'll correct it. So maybe just ask yourself, what calls to you, and then go look at what they're doing with it. That might be a way forward.
That is one big thing, is that like science is always like the way science has progressed is by admitting when we're wrong and changing our minds. And no scientist, I love what you said, like no scientist will ever say like, we are 110% absolutely sure. Like I said, science is not in the business of proof. We are in the business of evidence. And we use that evidence to come up with ideas, with conclusions about the universe around us. And we're always willing to change our minds about those things. I can't tell you, I would love to walk you through some of the many, many, many times in which everything we thought we knew about a topic completely changed because of one discovery. Like it happens all the fucking time. And so like, the big thing is novel testable predictions. Can I use this model? Like if evolution is true, then I can make a prediction that if I do XYZ thing, I'm going to get ABC result. And then I do the thing and I get the result. And that tells me that the model works. If the Big Bang is real, then I should be able to look in this area and see this kind of thing, this radiation in this direction, and I look and I find it, and that is a confirmation. And if we don't find those things, well, then we need to ask why. What did we get wrong? And when we find that out, rather than doing the post hoc immunization that a pseudoscientist would do and say, oh, well, that also works. It's that way too. It's just that special. You know, we're like, okay, well, then we either need to go change the theory, or we need to throw it the fuck out and start from scratch. You know, a great example of that was chromosome number 2 in humans. You know, we have all these chromosomes that are like the complete package of our DNA, and it turns out, you know, we have 46 pairs or 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs. Well, chimpanzees have an extra pair. They've got 24 pairs or 48 chromosomes. And so it's like, okay, if the evolutionary timeline from where our ancestors split from chimpanzee ancestors is right, that's not enough time to just lose a chromosome, like drop it on the side of the road. That is a lethal mutation, and any geneticist will know that doesn't work. And so we are in big trouble. Evolution doesn't make any sense anymore. Unless we can find something that makes that make sense, then theory of evolution has to be rewritten. And so here's a fun fact about chromosomes is that they have markers on them, certain sequences that give the chromosome some sort of predictable structure. In the very ends of the chromosome, there are these sequences called telomeres. And in the very center of the chromosome, there's a sequence called a centromere. So we have this centromere in the middle, in the center, and we have telomeres on the ends. And if, hypothetically, a chromosome were to fuse together with another chromosome, just stick end to end, then we would expect to find telomeres, the end pieces, in the middle, and we would expect to find 2 centromeres, but they wouldn't be in the middle. They'd be kind of like halfway up both ways, and probably one of them would be deactivated. Sure enough, human chromosome number 2 is telomeres on the end and telomeres in the center and 2 centromeres halfway up both sides, and one of them is deactivated. Exactly what we would expect to find, if that is indeed what happened. And then we can even look and find that same exact thing. That's called a Robertsonian translocation, and we can see it happening all over the place. Even we have case studies of that happening in living humans. And so, like, if that's a thing that's possible and heritable, evolution works again. And so we're willing to look for a reason to make this thing make sense. And if we can't find that shit, evolution's done. But it just so happens after so many chances to be wrong, evolution always comes back as being correct. Same thing with the Big Bang, same thing with the age of the Earth, same thing with plate tectonics, same thing with germs, same thing with cells. These are all theories. Cells, germs, plate tectonics, the age of the Earth, the shape of the Earth going around the sun, abiogenesis, evolution. These are all theories that keep coming back as correct, despite chance after chance after chance after chance after chance of being very easily wrong. So that's something that I would check out. Like if you're thinking about science, does it make predictions? Does it answer questions? Or is it just a random explanation that doesn't really mean anything? That's another good reason to think about, should you believe a thing?
Or for some reason, knowing that science changes and develops has been a reason that I've distrusted it. But it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. And the fact that it will self-correct makes it the most trustworthy. And so I feel that tension between, I know science has gotten things wrong before. That's why I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket. But then the basket I had before burned up. That is so common.
That is one of these, what I like to call an everlasting thought stopper that is put upon theists all the time. Whenever you have theist apologists will say, well, science has been wrong before. Science is all just theories. Science doesn't have any proof. It can't prove anything because science doesn't do proof. If you had asked somebody, however many hundreds of years ago, they would have believed the earth was flat and they wouldn't know anything about germs. And so meanwhile, we have an Iron Age sex and slavery manual. And that's something that's completely non-changing, except for the fact that the Bible is changed a lot. It's mistranslated, misinterpreted, reinterpreted. Which version of the infallible book do you have? The fact that there's a version should tell you enough, right? And so, that is a very common. I wouldn't say it's just for some reason that you have that. That's a super common thought-stopping tactic used by apologists all the time. But as you said, that's why science works. The reason why you want to get on a commercial jetliner today and fly somewhere is because it isn't something that the fucking Wright brothers built, right? It's because it got better over time. And the same thing with vaccines, the same thing with really anything in medicine. You're not going to go to the doctor and be bled out to balance your humors if you have a cold. You're going to get some fucking antibiotics and you're going to be okay. And so these are all things that science gets better and better. And it is possible that everything we know is wrong, sure. But two things to consider whenever you have that contradiction in your head. Number one is that science is getting better all the time. So when we talk about the age of the universe, it's not like one day it's 13.8 billion and then we're going to decide actually it's 2, right? It's nothing like that. It's that it's 13.85 or is it 13.8.37 or is it actually 13.8594? We're zeroing in closer and closer and closer and closer. We're getting higher resolution data, which is giving us higher resolution results and higher resolution models and theories. And so we're getting better and better and better over time. It's not like it's just some random guess that some guy came up with and we all liked it, so we all just started saying it. And then the second thing is, who do you want to if it's possible that everything could be wrong, which one do you want to bank on? Do you want to bank on it's possible that the creator of the universe written about in this book is wrong and therefore or isn't wrong, so we should be following the horrific practice of this? Or do you want to bank on the thing that works 99% of the time and maybe there's something there, but at the end of the day, it is what is allowing you to call us right now and we can talk to you over the internet and it's something that's working. So maybe there's something else going on there, but at least it fucking works, as opposed to the Bible, which is maybe it's inerrant, but it certainly isn't good or rational or reasonable or functional in any way. Just what team do you want to be on? You know what I mean? I want to be on the team that works. I want to be on the team that actually produces results, whether they work because of the way we think they do or not. At least I know that the airbags are going to work in my car because a bunch of physicists and engineers who are way fucking smarter than me made sure they do, and not sprinkling the blood of a dove on a leper to try to cure a bacterial infection.
I definitely was on team. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Catherine. We talked a lot. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I was on team don't go to hell for a while, but I'm moving beyond that now. So it was just a side comment.
That's a hard step to take, and I'm proud of you for taking it.
I used to suffer from the same thought stopper of, well, science is always changing. How can we possibly trust it? But it's like you can just take that reasoning and apply it to just about anything else, and see how absurd that type of approach becomes. Like, let's say you had a loved one that was murdered and the police are investigated, and you go, why are the police constantly changing their mind with new information, new data? Like, they had a suspect, now it's a different suspect. How can we possibly trust this? Like, we understand what the process is of a police investigation, how they will take the limited information they have, come up with a tentative conclusion, work off of that, get new information, realize that conclusion might be false, and come with a better conclusion. But we don't hear anybody saying, well, why do we trust the police? They're constantly changing their mind. Like, we don't say that because we know that the process works as they gather data, as they eliminate impossible conclusions. They'll usually get to finding the actual perpetrator, the actual murderer, or the actual whatever. And we can do that with just about anything. We do that with going to the doctor office. You're sneezing and coughing and you feel like you're half dead, and you go to the doctor's office and the doctor's like, well, I'm going to do this test and this test and this test, and I think it's this. And then they do a test and they go, oh, wait, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's something other thing. And then all of a sudden the person says, well, why you constantly change your mind? How can I possibly trust? Like, we see how absurd that approach is in a world where we don't know everything. And that's really the limitations of us, and what science attempts to overcome is that we don't know everything. So the approach we take acknowledges that, makes it that all of our conclusions are tentative and supported. And if something comes by and disrupts the conclusion, then that conclusion has to go. There's a really funny saying in that scientists, while reasonable, rational, great people, they're also ravenous dogs. If one of them senses a weakness in some other scientist's conclusion or process, they will tear into each other, because you don't become a well-known scientist, a well-funded scientist by simply towing the line. You become that type of scientist by overturning previous conclusions, by finding something new that is well supported. Scientists aren't really friends with each other. They can turn on each other on a dime if there's any type of weakness sensed. And that's a good thing. We want to get closer to the truth. We don't want a bunch of people getting together being buddy-buddy and disagreeing with each other. We want them to do that with each other. And obviously I'm being hyperbolic. They're great people. And there's lots of scientific friends. They're not just all bloodthirsty psychopaths. But I don't know, maybe Forrest can speak on that. But we see why this process is valuable. We see why we want it to be like this. It's okay that things change. The question is, what is the motivation for that change? Is it to come closer to the truth? Or do you want to have a motivation where it's like, we can't have anything change because it'll embarrass us. It goes against what our book says. We aren't comfortable with changing these conclusions because they really work for us, which is the case of a lot of the patriarchal type of religions in the world. They don't want things to change. They don't want, to not be in charge and not be overlords over their families and their women. They want things to stay the same. So it's fine. And like I said, I'm not harping you on it. Like I suffered from this think too, that, change is bad. And I look back and I go, oh man, I really wish I had thought about that a little bit deeper, because once you just apply it to literally anything else, you see how dumb it is. And that can be said about a lot of religious things that I suffered from back then. But anyway, we talked a lot. Hopefully we didn't talk your ear off. Is there anything you want to close with, Catherine? Anything you want to conclude on before we move on?
I think everything was very helpful. I still have quite a strong feeling in me that I don't want to kind of trust anyone or anything, but I think something this call is sort of illuminating for me is that maybe I should reframe it a bit that I'm trusting this method, and I think I can maybe get behind that a bit easier internally, and that ultimately people or individual people could do or say something that's not true or something, but the method I do think is the best one we have so far to find out if things are true or not. So,
maybe if maybe we can sum up this whole conversation in just this. treat this like a bad breakup, because like when you're in a relationship and you love somebody and that person does something and betrays you, it turns out to not be the person that you thought they were. Uh, Out of that relationship, it can be very hard to say to yourself, I'll ever trust anybody ever again, or I'll ever feel like this ever again. That type of healing takes time and little step-by-step intervals of learning to trust again. And you may want to just approach it with that. Because Forrest and I are not telling you, throw yourself into science, just trust it, it'll be fine. Just trust us, it'll be fine. Like, we're not saying that at all. You may just want to treat it like a breakup, and takes time to heal, take time to think. And any conclusions that you draw or any conclusions that you grab, hold on to them tentatively. Say to yourself, I think this is the case, but I don't know that this is the case. And if I'm wrong about this, that's fine. I'll adjust my view later on. Nobody's compelling you to plant a flag anywhere. No one's compelling you to make any definite statements. Just the way that after a breakup, nobody's compelling you to get right into another relationship and keep going like nothing ever happened. It could be that you just need some time, take small steps, be gentle with yourself and be honest with yourself, and give yourself a little bit of leeway. You've been tricked by a religion. So was I. I don't think Forrest was. I think Forrest was not in a religious organization, but
it was a weird thing.
Yeah. But we've all been tricked. We've all been duped, and it's okay. Be gentle with yourself and do your best going forward. Take it one step at a time.
I realize my question was quite simple, but I want to let you know that what you've said has helped me a lot, and I feel like I have a way to move forward. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. Glad we could help.
I appreciate you, Catherine, and feel free to call back at any time, especially if I'm on, and ask more questions, because I think your questions have been great, and I really appreciate you listening to us ramble for 40 minutes.
No, it was very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Catherine. Have a good night. All right. Let's go drop this call. Okay. Very nice person. Yeah. And like I said, I absolutely appreciate that self-awareness and that caution, because that is exactly the lesson that should be learned after you leave a religion. Yeah. So she's taking a bad experience and doing something very good with it, with her life.
It's really cool.
Kudos.
It's really cool, because a lot of religious people that deconstruct will, like, there's that kind of like religion to a conspiracy theory pipeline where it's like, well, if I questioned the king of the universe and he disappeared, so like now I think that maybe the government is putting microchips in vaccines, and if I question anything, then that means that my question is the answer. And it's like, you get a lot of people who deconstruct from religion and then fall into some genuinely crazy shit. And it sounds like Catherine is aware of that danger and is just very, very, very cautious. And I wish more people would deconstruct that way. That's incredibly cool.
That's like one extreme where you get out of the religion and now you're just as hypercritical, hypersensitive to anything that makes any type of statement. And then there's the other side where you don't learn anything at all and you go right into a different religion. Like I've heard of Jehovah's Witnesses jumping over to Catholicism. I'm like, no, what do you do? Like, did you not take a moment to self-reflect on anything? Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll get to our next call here. We have 3 calls left in the queue. Forrest, just a heads up, this is gonna be for you. I'm gonna step away for the bathroom. So if producer can pull me off the screen, I'm gonna introduce our caller and then I will disappear. Okay, we have Billy, pronouns he, him, from Texas. Billy's a theist, and Billy makes a statement: Forrest is wrong about abiogenesis.
Oh goodness. Somebody ought to tell me.
This call is going to go great. I can tell.
Yeah. Haven't we? I believe we've talked before, haven't we?
Oh yeah, we have. And since we've talked, I've done some research. And
have we talked about abiogenesis specifically?
No, I don't think we did talk about abiogenesis. But I've found myself every time I hear you talk about abiogenesis, I throw up in my mouth a little bit, because we are light years away from abiogenesis, dude. Like you kind of give the impression that we have a solid understanding of abiogenesis. No, we don't, dude. Like we are so far
I think
away
what's
from
more important
abiogenesis.
is the fact that I'm so low in the frame. Why am I so low in the frame? What's going on with that?
Yeah, that's not cool.
I don't.
Yeah. Fix the frame.
No. I can't. I don't have controls over any of that. I'm just going to be down here on the fucking resting my chin on the lower third. So
you get down there, goddamn.
What I want to just like draw attention to right away, or I guess ask about, is that like the evidence that we have supporting abiogenesis and like pointing in that direction is very solid, and it does point in that direction pretty like I hesitate to use the word conclusively on anything, but like as conclusive as something can be, we're about there. And so like sure, we've never like created a new cell in a lab, but that's as ridiculous of a thing to ask for at this moment as asking to watch a human evolve from a monkey in a lab. That just doesn't really work. And so like what I want to understand from you is like when I talk about this stuff, I'm talking about the same level of evidence and in the same tone of voice as I would give with like if we were talking about, you know, the Big Bang or whatever else. And it doesn't seem like you have a problem with those things unless you do. So why abiogenesis, and what is the particular issue that you're having with it or with me talking about it?
Well, your evidence seems to be like, oh, we find amino acids in the space, or RNA can self-replicate. And you know what? RNA, there's only one specific sequence of RNA that can self-replicate in a laboratory, and it can only replicate itself because it's symmetrical. And as soon as it sequences an RNA that's not symmetrical, the process dies. They can only get it to happen like 3 or 4 times before it stops happening. So there's only one very specific sequence of RNA that can, but you kind of make it seem like any RNA, all RNA can self-replicate. No, it can't, dude. It's only one specific sequence.
So I said RNA can self-replicate. For me to say RNA can do anything at all would be a gross oversimplification if somebody were to say, okay, well then all RNA can do this thing that I said, because there's like 50 different kinds of RNA and they all do their own thing. So like, yeah, I would never sit here and say that like transfer RNA is capable of post-transcriptional gene regulation like that. No. That's microRNA that does that, which is a totally different small non-coding RNA versus the long non-coding RNAs that are a whole family that do these things and like this. So yeah, when I say RNA can self-replicate, some things which are RNA can do that. And you talk about one specific sequence. As far as I know, it's more than that, but who knows? Maybe, let's say you're right. Let's say it is just one specific sequence that can do it. That is still demonstration that this thing can behave this way under natural circumstances, which means that there's ways to do this other ways potentially too. So like, again, you mentioned like seeing, amino acids in space. If I can find an amino acid, if I can find one amino acid in space, then that tells me a little bit about how these things can possibly self-assemble. It doesn't mean that we've seen every amino acid in the right chiral configuration, in the right way to become life. No, it just means that like, okay, we can see this thing and it does work. It just so happens we found over 500 amino acids, but like,
yeah, and that's
like that's what I'm saying.
But that's a bad thing, dude. Like,
it's a bad thing we found 500 amino acids when we only need 20 for life.
Exactly, dude. Exactly. When you have hundreds of amino acids all swimming around, but you only need 20 of them, what's to say that like any one of the other ones aren't going to sequence instead? And they're all racemic. When we need homochiral RNA or amino acids, if you have a pool of hundreds of different amino acids and you only need 20 of them, and they all have to be left-handed, then you're going to have kind of a problem, you know.
So the problem with what you're saying is that, like, yes, you do need the amino acids to be homochiral, and we do usually find them in racemic mixtures whenever we look up, when we find them in nature, we find them in space, whatever. However, there is a bias where they are predominantly left-handed, which is what we need for life. And so, like, we currently have several biotic and abiotic ways. Well, that's not true. Even the abiotic ways require a scientist doing it. So we have several ways that we can resolve racemic mixtures of amino acids. And for those who don't know in the chat or whatever, that means that we can take a heterochiral mixture, a racemic mixture, and make them homochiral. We only have biotic ways to do that. We don't know of a consistent, reliable abiotic way to do that yet. But nature seems to, because we find these things more often than not, they are in the right configuration. It's not always, but there is definitely a bias. And what's more important is that, like, you talk about, wouldn't it be a problem if there's all these different amino? No, absolutely not. the ones that are present in life work. There's lots of different ways to have. A great example of this would be like pentadactyly, right? All tetrapods that have fingers have 5 of them, right? Except for, I guess, that's not true to say because horses and shit, but like all things that have more than things have 5. A lot of shit has 5 fingers. There's no way I'm going to phrase that appropriately, but a lot of shit has 5 fingers. But if you go back a little while, that wasn't the case. There was a time when there were lots of different configurations of different digits on different limbs. And it just happens that the 5-finger configuration is what worked out and what stuck around. So when we talk about having like all these different amino acids, there's hundreds and hundreds of. Well, it just so happens that the just about 20, sometimes there's special circumstances where you can have a couple extra. So like up to 22 amino acids are the ones that worked out and are doing the job the way that we need. And I think that actually makes more sense chemically when we consider why amino acids form the proteins that they do and do the things that they do in nature. It's because of their tails that they behave the way they do. And so we only needed these 20 types of tails to do the stuff we needed. All these extra ones just aren't necessary. And so they're not biosynthesized. And so like that simply doesn't stack up to say the fact that there's more of them means that it's impossible. Like that doesn't make any logical sense to me.
I'm not saying. I mean, I wouldn't say impossible, but you have to admit that the odds of that happening. And I know there's once we start discussing odds, it gets crazy. But the odds of those 20 amino acids. Like, tell me, what do you think about chiral induced spin selectivity? Do you think that has something to do with the? Oh, okay. Well, that's the thing.
I'm not educated on enough to speak.
All right. That's the thing that keeps our cells from bursting into flames, and from friction or whatever. But anyway, that's one way that. But that has to happen inside of a cell. But that's just a way that we can make amino acids, or that's a way for a cell to select only left-handed amino acids. But yeah, I'm getting off track.
Yeah, I'm not educated on that topic enough to speak about it intelligently. I wouldn't have anything interesting to say, but I can say, like, I would just repeat what I said a minute ago. If that is a way, an abiotic way to produce homochiral left-handed amino acids, neat. Then that might be one of the ways it happened. I would want to see some actual data on whether or not that's possible or like reasonable to expect, or if indeed it works as well as it did. And then for sure, I would want to see some evidence pointing in that direction that is what happened, not just one of the ways that it could have.
Well, the fact remains that we're still light years away from achieving abiogenesis. I mean, light years. If I gave you all the parts of a cell, you wouldn't be able to put it together, and that's if I gave you all of it, including like topoisomerase and all the other complex biomolecules. If I gave them all to you, you wouldn't be able to put it together. Can I ask
you a question just then? First of all, that doesn't matter. Sure. Second of all, why did you pick topoisomerase out of all the possible enzymes? Why is that the one that you jumped to?
Well, because topoisomerase is extraordinarily complex. It took a supercomputer 1.5 years to sequence a topoisomerase molecule, and that molecule had to be molecule had to be present the very first time DNA was ever replicated. That molecule had to have been present. So there's no chances of chemical evolution creating this molecule.
That's not necessarily true. But like the thing is, the issue is, the reason why I asked you why you picked that particular one is because it's a lot like whenever a creationist says you can't prove evolution because of the bombardier beetle. The reason why that's something that's in your head, I would wager, is because that's the exact only molecule that people like Michael Behe and the Discovery Institute and I think James Tour and all these other people who are creationists like to point to this one thing that they don't have an explanation for, and it kind of just gets out there in the ether of like creationist talking points. And then no matter what, if we have all of the evidence for every other thing and it all makes sense, yeah, but you don't know about the bombardier beetle, and it's like, well, number one, yes, we fucking do, but also even if we didn't, why is that the hang? Or hummingbirds. That's another one that I get all the time. Well, you don't know how hummingbirds evolve. We don't have a fossil record for hummingbirds. We have a solid, amazing fossil record for whales. Why didn't you talk about them? It's because some fucking creationist said hummingbirds and it became popular. And so, like, I think with this, Topai Samare, say we don't know jack shit about it. Okay, that's not a reason to then implant magical thinking to account for just a pocket of ignorance.
We know a lot about it now, but yeah, I think the pistol shrimp is better.
Now.
I think the pistol shrimp is better, dude. It's so cool.
Right,
You know
but like that's the thing.
dude?
Even if we don't know shit about pistol shrimp, if we don't know shit about topaz, if we don't know anything about anything, completely throw out the entire theory of evolution, throw out everything we know about abiogenesis, completely start from scratch, you still have exactly as much evidence as you do right now for creationism, which is none. And so, like, just saying we don't understand XYZ thing doesn't really help, because X equals 0 is not the same thing as Y equals 1. You understand?
Well, until we can, but we have evidence of intelligent things creating complex things, codes and stuff.
Sure.
So we have evidence of intelligent things creating intelligent, or creative things.
Right.
Or
Do we
things.
have evidence? Do we have any evidence? Do we have any evidence of intelligent things creating life?
Well, no. Well, not from scratch.
No. You just said several times that we're light years away from it, right?
That would be
so there's no reason. So then there's no reason. So that, right, and as you said, we're light years away from that. So there's no reason to assume that intelligence made life, because we have no examples of that whatsoever.
Well, do we have to? I mean, do we have to have an example of it to know for a fact that that's what happened?
Nope, we just need evidence, which is why we don't need an example of us making abiogenesis happen to know that it happened. We may be light years away from making a cell, but that doesn't mean that we don't know that it happened. Thank you very much, Billy.
But we
now agree.
But we have no evidence that nature can sequence a functional genome from scratch by natural.
That doesn't
processes.
matter.
Matter of fact,
that doesn't matter.
Matter of fact,
because that's not what we were talking about.
We have evidence to the contrary, though.
Billy, we need to address what we have. Billy, don't just jump to the next point on your script. We need to address what we just established. We know that all 5 nitrogenous bases to make DNA or RNA do self-assemble. We find them in space. And we know that they polymerize and form oligoribonucleotides by themselves under natural conditions. And we know that at least some RNA can self-replicate. And we know that lots of different kinds of RNA can catalyze biochemical reactions, and also other kinds of RNA can be storage of genetic material. So, like, we don't need to have a complete sequence of a functional genome from scratch in front of us to know the individual pieces built together. In the same reason that we have not seen a whale evolve from an Indo-Hyas in front of our very eyes, but the pieces that we have of that history all point in that direction reliably, repeatably, and understandably. And so we don't need the whole thing. That's a ridiculous claim to make. As you just said, we just need evidence pointing in this direction. That's why you're claiming that there's a guy that made this stuff out, which doesn't make any fucking sense. And I'm claiming that the evidence that we have that shows that these things are natural means that other things are probably natural too.
So you can just make that leap? You can just do that?
It's not a leap.
Because I'm not allowed to do that.
It's not a leap. It's not a leap. My thought process here is that every single we can break down the entire thing from absolute Big Bang beginnings all the way up to the origins of humanity and me sitting here being stupid on the internet. Every single bit of that, we can break it down into 10 billion theoretical steps. And we don't have all of those steps. We don't know every single one of those steps. But every single one of the steps that we have, which is a fuckload, Billy, every single one of them is natural. Every single one of them is a naturalistic process. And therefore, it's not impossible that there's a supernatural explanation for one or two of them, but there's absolutely no reason for me to assume that that's the case. That would be a leap.
I have to correct something you said. You said that there are certain RNA molecules that can self-replicate. There's only one. Scientists
I know. You already said that earlier. It doesn't matter, Billy, because we already covered it. You're just jumping back to the script. We already covered that. We already went down that road.
But then why did you say that there are certain RNA molecules that can self-replicate? Because we already went down the road.
It's not that big. It's not that big of a deal. But if it's going to make you fucking... Dude, if it's going to make you feel better, we know of at least one Is that better? I tweaked the language slightly, and the point is the exact same and means the exact same thing, and nobody is better for it. Like, just can we keep up with what we're talking about here? It's not better. It doesn't make any sense to say that there may be something here that's supernatural, so there is, right?
I mean, I didn't say anything about supernatural. I just said intelligent. Like, the intelligence that's required to sequence the genome is unfucking believable, dude. Like, the amount of
intelligence you're talking about is a god.
I mean, I don't know what the fuck it is, but it's intelligent, whatever it is. And
is it outside of the universe? Is it more powerful than? Okay, so some guy. So some guy. Let's not say supernatural. It's some fucking guy that's real smart, and he made this stuff because he's a super cool space wizard like that. Whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, we don't have any evidence, or I shouldn't even say evidence. We don't have any single demonstrated case of that guy doing anything in a way that we know for sure is that guy, nor do we have any single demonstrated case of that guy existing. So you have this guy that we don't know exists and we don't know can do anything. And you're saying that it's reasonable for us to implant his existence and utility and behavior in any pocket of ignorance you like. And meanwhile, I'm saying that every single thing we've ever seen has been natural, so probably the rest of it is too.
I never said any of the things that you just said. That was the hugest, most blatant straw man bro ever. And you
certainly was not. That's the case. It was facetious, but it wasn't a straw man.
I never said anything. I never said anything about a guy. In every facet of ignorance. I never said any of that shit, dude.
I said any Billy, facet of ignorance that you like. I didn't say every.
Yeah. Hey Billy, I'm gonna sum up. I'm gonna sum up, Billy. I'm gonna sum up pretty much what your approach is to this whole thing. It's known as the argument from incredulity. You're basically hand waving at the.
Wait.
Yeah, this is ultimately your approach to this. You're hand waving. Hold on, Billy. Let me. Because you just explained it to me and I judged it. So you are basically saying.
You don't get to do
I
that.
absolutely get to do. I'm the host of the show. So what you're basically doing here is you are hand waving at complexity. You're hand waving. No, it's not. You're hand waving. I'm pointing out a flaw in your logic and in your reasoning. Okay. A straw man is where I basically point to a characteristic flaw and say you're all wrong.
Oh my God, Billy.
All right.
This is not your show, dude. You need to let the host explain something to you. Shut the fuck up and let Eric talk.
So what you're doing, Billy. Okay, Billy. So what you're doing is you're hand waving at complexity, you're hand waving at gaps in our knowledge, you're hand waving at the fact that we can't do certain things in the lab. And you're taking that information and going, based on this, I can't imagine how this came about naturally. Therefore, it did not come about naturally. That is a huge flaw in your logic. It's called the argument for incredulity. You are soothing your idea of this with two things. One is you said that we can't do this in the lab. And the second thing, which is what really stuck out to me, even though I'm not even a scientist, is that you say you were light years away from doing this. That is not true. You have no idea if that's the case or not. There's a brand new video over on Veritasium. No, you don't. So hold on here. There's a brand new video over on Veritasium. Billy, I'm going to mute you if you don't stop. Brand new video over on Veritasium. That's fine. I'm not talking to you at this point. I'm talking to the audience, so you're muted.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and mute him because he just cannot behave himself.
Yeah. Hopefully he didn't unmute. Okay, there we go. All right. Billy, if you're still there and you're brave enough, listen, please.
No, he hung up.
This is... Okay, that's fine.
The dude literally could not handle not being able to just interject everything all the time. Billy, grow the fuck up and call back in sometime. We'll talk about this. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Anyway, aside from his argument for incredulity, the fact that Billy says, we have gaps and we have problems, therefore this is impossible, or therefore we are light years away, is patently false. Billy cannot possibly know that. And here's a counterexample to his light years away thing. Veritasium, amazing channel, by the way. You should go subscribe and watch it. Obviously, after this scream, don't bring our numbers down. But their latest video is called "The Most Useful Thing AI Has Ever Done." And it's talking about protein sequencing, which has huge ramifications on not just medicine and biology, but on things like handling pollution on our planet, breaking down plastics. Like, it's a cross-cutting discovery across all these things. Protein sequencing is very hard to do. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of computational power. It used to be done by hand, I think, but it's mostly done by computers, outdated at this point, outdated algorithms. So to give you an idea of how much we've sequenced proteins over the last, I'm looking at the data right here on the video, over the last 30 years, we have sequenced about 100,000 proteins, a little shy of 100,000 proteins over 30 years, 30, 40 years of hard work by scientists and computers. There's a brand new thing, well, not brand new anymore. There's a brand new AI algorithm called AlphaFold 2. All right. Keep in mind, 30 years, we just are starting to approach 100,000 protein sequence. In 1 year, AlphaFold sequenced over 40 million. It blew away the human efforts in this because we had a good AI algorithm that did a lot of really cool things. And the video goes into it. It's fucking fascinating. But imagine before AlphaFold 2 got released, somebody said, well, we're never going to be able to sequel all these proteins because we're light years away from doing this. And all of a sudden, technology comes out of the blue and just blows the human computations out of the water and does all this work for us. Billy has no idea what's going to come out tomorrow. Billy has no idea what scientific discoveries were going to happen tomorrow. And he's sitting there with his argument of incredulity, and he's saying to himself, well, I know the capabilities of scientists. I know what they can and can't do. And I know what's impossible and impossible. Billy, you don't. You're just trying to force your conclusion, and you're finding whatever means necessary to do it. I didn't understand half the conversation between you and Forrest, but I can still look at it and go, I see problems with your arguments. I see problems with your logic. And that's exactly what you're doing.
The entire argument was just like Billy was regurgitating what a lot of apologists and creationists will say, which is so chirality. When we talk about that, there's just an example, right? So when you have an organic molecule, a carbon-based molecule, and it has one carbon has 4 bonding sites. It can have 4 bonds, right? When each one of those 4 bonds is a different thing, it's called chiral. So it's a chiral molecule now. And so what that means is the order in which those different things are around the molecule will make the molecule behave in different ways. A great way to think about that is your hands. When we talk about left and right-handed molecules, right? My hands can superimpose on each other. They can look the same on top, but they are functionally different, and they're going to behave like they're, so like that's a way to think about it. With these chiral molecules, a great example from a long time ago was thalidomide, was this drug that was used to treat morning sickness. But one chiral molecule, one of the what we call enantiomers. So one enantiomer, the right-handed or left-handed sequence of this molecule or form. One form of this molecule treated morning sickness. The other form of this molecule caused significant birth defects. And so you can look up thalidomide babies and you'll see these people who were born without limbs or whatever because their parents cured their morning sickness with this stuff.
Wow.
And so what we need to do is if we have a racemic mixture, which means a mixture of both left and right-handed enantiomers of the same molecule, then we need to resolve that mixture in order to make it homochiral, to make sure there's only one chirality, only one form, either a left or right-handed form of this molecule present, to make sure the drug does only what we want it to do and not some other fucking thing. And we have only biotic ways to do that. We can do that through enzyme reactions. We can do that through condensation. We can crystallize the molecule and literally sort it by hand. We can do like precipitation, all sorts of different ways we can do this, but it takes people or organic molecules to do it. We don't have an abiotic way to make that happen yet. And so when we talk about amino acids are chiral. It is literally one carbon atom. It's got an amine group on one side. It's got a carboxylic acid group on the other side. It's got a hydrogen up here, and it's got some weird shit down at the bottom. The fourth group is a bunch of variation, a bunch of whatevers, and that's each different type of amino acid has a different, what we call a side chain or a tail, this long thing that is whatever the fuck it is. And so each different amino acid has a different side chain, this different whatever the fourth thing is. And so they're all, except for one, chiral. One of them has another hydrogen, so it's not chiral. I think it's glycine, if I remember right. And so all these hundreds of amino acids we found are all chiral molecules. And in order to work in life, in order to build proteins that make us, they have to be all left-handed. They have to be homochiral. And we don't know a way to make amino acids homochiral abiotically yet. We don't. But as we talked about with the call with Billy, nature seems to have an idea, because when we find amino acids, they are more often than not left-handed. And so, like, there is clearly some sort of way to do that. We just don't know it yet. And there's a few ideas, a few hypotheses of how that can work. Billy mentioned one that I'm not familiar with. But that's the long and short of, like, the reason why Billy's argument is so frustrating is that he's literally taking this very common creationist talking point. Okay, well, I know that we know where the atoms that make amino acids come from. I know that they self-assemble into the basic things quite commonly. I know that they self-assemble into amino acids by themselves. And I know that when they are proteins, that they behave the way that they do based on totally natural laws. And I know that to get to proteins is a naturalistic process. And I know that the initial elongation of amino acids into simple peptides is a naturalistic process. But right here in the very center of all of that is this one single thing, getting the amino acids all shaped the right way. We know where they come from. We know every step up to where we get to amino acids. We know every step from homochiral amino acids all the way up to being a protein. But this one part here, we're talking about this, we don't know yet, which means we are light years away from abiogenesis, and some fucking guy did it. And then you're going to accuse me of making a leap. What's frustrating about it, like with the example I was going to give before Billy bitched out, was that, like, if I have like a bag of marbles, a big bag here, and I pull a blue marble out and a blue marble out and a blue marble out and a blue, and for hundreds of years, blue, 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 at a certain point, it's possible that the next one's going to be a ferret, but it's probably going to be a motherfucking blue marble. And so, like, if we look out in nature and we're doing this science and we continue over and over, natural process, natural process, natural process, and at no point have we ever even come close to saying, actually, some guy did it. It was just some guy. It was some fucking guy. And he just did it. And we don't know why. Never, ever have we even come within an inch of doing it. We are light years away from some guy being the explanation. There's a certain point where you can be like, you know what? It's probably going to be a natural process. And until we have a reason to think otherwise, it's not a leap. It is a very safe and fair assumption to say. Anyway, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
To rag on Billy a little bit more because he deserves it. So like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when this new science was just discovered, okay, let's just quantify all the stuff you talked about. Let's say that there are 100 things to consider when you're talking about abiogenesis. Let's say we started 150 years ago. The exact numbers don't matter. It's just an illustration. Somebody back then pointed at all 100 unknown things and said, God. And then a scientist came by who said, no, wait, let's investigate. And they eliminated one of those things. One of those things became a natural explanation. And then some other religious person came by and said, that one's natural. But all the other 99, God. And now here's Billy 100-something years later. And we have vanishingly few items left as unknowns. And they're all natural. And here's Billy going, God. Like, Billy doesn't understand that he is just the next person in line in a train of incredulity. It's so frustrating. This is like Christians in the first century going, Jesus will be back any day now. We have Christians here in the 21st century. Jesus will be back any day now. Nothing changes. It's so frustrating. And it's okay, Billy. And Billy, I'm talking to you now again. It's okay that you are attached to your beliefs. It's okay that you find some type of value in them, but look at things honestly and drop the attitude, because we are trying to have we're trying to have a conversation with you. I think we were respectful up until you started getting belligerent with us. Like, we were taking you seriously. Like, you're not going to convince us acting like that, but you are going to help us convince a bunch of people in the audience that you are not on the right track there. If you think you did something helpful here, you definitely didn't. I can guarantee you.
Like, just locking down on, well, you said some RNA, but I'm saying it's only one. And now we're talking about that instead of like the whole fucking monologue of reason that we just talked about. Yeah. And then it's over and over, just like fucking reason for thee, but not for me. It's so frustrating. Oh, and also to the person in the chat, who I don't know why you got muted, but I saw the last thing that finally ticked over where you were saying, I wonder what other monomers could create life besides amino acids. Nucleic acids, fatty acids, and sugars. Those are the monomers that make the other 3 macromolecules that make life. This shit works, so it does. So it's not like amino acids are this one singular special thing. There are 4 major macromolecules of life. They are all made of monomers. And they work because of the way, like, I don't know how to break this down any further. Like, there's no special pleading here. And what's so frustrating is like what you were just talking about, Eric, where it's like, no, actually it's God. Is that's always how it is with creationists, is that you don't know how this works. We don't have an answer for this. That means it's God. And then the second we do have an answer for it, it's so complicated, that means it's God. It was that way with DNA. We don't know. How is it that birds just know how to be birds and bears know how to be bears? Actually, it's DNA. DNA is so complex, it must be a God that made it. Meanwhile, before then, it's God's creating these things. God's making sure. Yeah. God knows you in the womb and forms you. There's no way that could happen otherwise. Actually, there's this shit called DNA, and then there's these developmental pathways, and that's how it works. God did that. That's how it is. It's just, we talked to, I believe it was Catherine, I think it was, about like, that is the post hoc immunizing hypothesis. That is what that is. You are immunizing your claim against rationality and reason by deciding that no matter what comes next, this will be the way that it is interpreted. And it sucks, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Oh, and finally, learn what an ad hom is. And a straw man is there, Billy?
Oh my gosh.
Seriously. Me saying there's a problem with your logic is not an ad hom. Okay?
It's not.
There's a problem in your logic, and therefore your conclusion is indeterminate. That's not an ad hom. Okay, Billy?
If I could have you were talking about if you could wave a magic wand and get one wish, you'd get rid of religion. My one wish would be that fucking people who debate shit on the internet learn what a motherfucking ad hominem is. Because it's not any time you are criticized or any time you are insulted or any time anybody's mean to you. It is an insult in place of an argument. If you make an insult as an argument, that is an ad hominem. If we insult you along with the argument or instead just by itself and there is no argument, that's not an ad hominem. I'm not saying you are wrong because you are ignorant. I'm saying you are wrong and ignorant. That is not an ad hominem attack. Just learn what things are, y'all. Please.
You're wrong because you're an idiot is an ad hom. You're wrong and you're an idiot is not an ad hom.
It's not.
But I didn't call you an idiot. I was respectful and I was calm up until you started saying, "Oh, that's a fallacy." Like, get real, dude. Just let me talk. Let me explain to you what the incredulity fallacy is. And
literally.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, he hung up because he couldn't handle the fact that we were just going to talk for a second. That tells me everything I need to know about Billy's claims.
I think what really got my goat is when he declared that we're light years away from this. And it's like, no, you have no clue what's going to happen tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
AI is doing so much for us. Like it's doing a lot of bad stuff for us. But man, when it came to like scientific discovery, like, holy shit, AI is going to revolutionize a lot of stuff. And it already has. Like, Billy basically has a crystal ball and he's like, I can see into the future. And it's like, no, you don't.
No, you don't understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're complaining.
Wait, that was a silly little joke he made. That was a funny thing that he said. That's what fuck.
Okay, let's stop complaining. We're better than this. Forrest, we're better than this. We let our emotions get to us, Forrest. Maybe you're true, but don't tell the audience that. They can't know.
Right.
All right. Okay, let's wrap this show up. We have one more caller. We have Marco from Mexico. Pronouns he, him. Marco is a theist, and he's asking the question, why would you consider instant miracles like cancer healings due to prayer fake? So Marco, I'll let you elaborate, but I do want to state that I was up to 5 p.m. last night making a document on just this topic. So is there a God? Did he set this up? I don't know, but I'm willing to talk to you about it. So. Hey, Marco, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, you sound great.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to ask your opinion and if you have any sort of methodology to generally analyze miracles in a proper way. With that, I mean, how can you prove they're right or they're just explained by naturalistic means? For me, I consider three options. The first one is Jesus is God, Yahweh exists. He created us. That's the first option as a Christian point of view. The second is we are God actually, or parts of the divine, and therefore we can actually influence matter within our thoughts and cause changes in the matter. Therefore, vibrating high can cause some health benefits like cancer healings and stuff. And the third one is, well, the first and second one are incorrect, and therefore it always has a naturalistic explanation. How would you guys address all these kinds of testimonies where basically patients provide evidence with laboratory studies where cancer completely disappears after praying? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I have a million notes already. Eric, do you want to start?
Sure. I just want to just a minor nitpick. I don't think it's going to really get in the way of anything. But the three options you presented about Jesus as God, or we are God and the prayers work, or neither of those are true and it's completely natural. That's not necessarily covering all possibilities. It's not a true trichotomy. But that's fine. Let's just go ahead and roll with it. But my thing would be a fourth thing, and that it is a natural explanation. And there's no supernatural explanation involved. That would be the fourth possibility. That would cover all bases. So we can basically boil it down to natural versus non-natural. But you talked about methodology when it comes to prayers and intercessory prayer in healing people. So I can say the same thing about wearing lucky socks when my football team plays a game, right? I can say, hey, when I wore my lucky socks, my football team won the coin toss. So I'm going to wear my socks next time. And the next time they win the coin toss. And the next time I win the coin toss. I can start building up this case and thinking that my socks actually have something to do with the coin toss outcome. But then all of a sudden it doesn't. And then we have a tendency to start ignoring data like that. We have a tendency to ignore things that disconfirm our preferred conclusions. Now, you said there was a study where cancer just vanished after prayer, but there's also studies where cancer did not just vanish after prayer. And in fact, we have cancer cases that vanish with no prayer involved. We have atheists who just went into spontaneous remission. We've had Muslims pray to their God, and all of a sudden they have spontaneous remission. So I look at it holistically, and yes, for methodologies, I'm looking at it holistically, and I'm going, what is actually a factor in these healings and what isn't? And when I compare all the cases, and I see that the prayer is not the constant factor in any of them. In fact, prayer is absent in some of them. I remove prayer from consideration the same way that I would remove socks from my consideration when I'm determining whether my team will win the coin toss or not. So that's my method.
Yeah, but if you, for example, just to mention in my church here in my town, I was looking at a session. Basically, the pastor asked all the people to come in front to the altar and give testimonies of what God has changed in his or her life. They start just mentioning miracle after miracle after miracle with evidence and after evidence with doctors being impressed about the sudden healing. If you could find just naturalistic explanation, would you consider to be like somehow intellectually dishonest to attribute that just to luck, as to wearing socks when your favorite team plays and suddenly wins the game? Wouldn't you think it would be like a enormous, gigantic coincidence that healing happens when prayer is performed?
So the issue here, like that, if the word "if" is doing all the heavy lifting for what you're saying. So like the I think what Eric pointed out here is really important, is that like, if we could say, I prayed for this person prayed, whatever it is, and now we see this remission of cancer. Okay, that's one point of data. But then we also see all these other cases where cancer goes into remission without prayer, and we see lines where it goes in remission for other places. And what's interesting is that there are actually studies on intercessory prayer as like combined with medical treatment, not in place of medical treatment, but like if someone is sick, what happens when they pray? And they actually do these studies with one group that gets no prayer whatsoever, one group that is prayed over and doesn't know about it, and the other group that is prayed over and does know about it. And weirdly enough, the people who are being prayed over to get better and they know what's happening actually tend to have worse health outcomes because it doesn't fucking do anything, and then they feel bad and they feel like let down and let alone. And so, like, if we're gonna sit here and say that, like, to pick your favorite X amount of cases of prayer occurring and then cancer goes into remission, and that's proof for God, what about all the people who die after they pray? What about all the times when prayer doesn't make the cancer go away? What about all the times when the cancer gets worse after praying? My dad was a Catholic. He died from cancer. I guarantee he was praying and it didn't do shit. And so, like, what about all of those data points? Was God absent in those cases? Were they praying wrong? Was it, if the word "if" in your argument here is doing all of the work for you, because there simply isn't any evidence pointing in the way that you're saying. In fact, there is some evidence pointing in the opposite direction.
And Marco, to go off of what Forrest just said there, so we'll just go ahead and grant, because it happens. People get sick. Somebody prays for them, and they get better suddenly and seemingly without explanation. That happens. It happens a lot. Okay.
Yes.
But it also happens for members of other religions praying to a different God. And it also happens for people who don't pray at all. And it also happens for atheists. So taking all that together holistically, what does that tell you about the prayer part? At the bare minimum, what's it tell you about the prayer part? Go ahead.
Yeah, from the Christian position, we would argue, well, not me, because it's not my original thoughts, but pastors or the Bible would argue that those are demons acting and having some sort of legality or rights to heal people in order for them to keep them distracted from the true God, from the true the true God.
So,
and therefore,
that reasoning is basically, okay, God does this for us if you pray, but then
unless
demons are meddling in that process. And if demons are meddling in that process, then how can you trust any of the results from that process?
I'm not sure if I understand that.
Well, you said that like I asked you the question about the different scenarios of the religious, non-religious, praying or not praying, and they're all miraculously, quote unquote, healing, inexplicably healing. All right. My question to you was, what does that tell us bare minimum about the prayer? And you went into how, well, maybe demons are involved because some pastors say that's the case. That doesn't really answer my question there. Let me put it this way. Okay. I got 5 people lining up. I have 5 people on a row, like on a cooking show, and I'm going to have them all bake a cake. Okay. They all have the instructions for a cake there. They all start mixing, but half of them have to hop on one foot while they're doing it the whole time. Okay. So 5 people all baking a cake. Half of them have to jump on one foot. They all bake a cake. Half of them jump on a foot to bake a cake. The other half didn't jump on a foot to bake a cake. What does that tell us about jumping on the foot?
That it possibly has no influence over the outcome, I guess. But
had nothing to do with it.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So now when we get into the studies, you mentioned a study, right? You mentioned a study where somebody got prayed for and they healed. And yes, that happens. There are studies that show that. But there's a really interesting study. Okay. It's an aggregate study. So it's not just like looking at one set of cases. It's actually collecting and aggregating a bunch of those studies together. You may have not seen it. You may have, but it's from PubMed, October to December 2009. I don't have the title here because I was late and I didn't get the title, but I can post a link in the chat here in a moment. They aggregated all of these prayer studies together. They said, hey, in this study, we saw a positive correlation between prayer and recovery. They even prayed for certain animals with certain injuries, and those animals healed faster than the animals that weren't prayed for. Amazing, right? But then they go, oh, but wait, here's another study where it shows that prayer had no effect on the people being prayed for versus the control group. And oh, hey, here's another collection of studies where we see a negative effect of prayer on people. The people that were prayed for did worse. So you take all the studies together and go, some studies confirm, some studies are neutral, some studies disconfirm or deny. put them all together. Oh, hey, guess what? It's all a wash. Same thing with baking the cake and hopping on 1 foot. I could have 100 people come up and say, to bake my cake, I'd be sure I hop on 1 foot. That doesn't mean that foot hopping was necessary or was anything involved in the process. So that's how we look at it, because you can point to a study, and I absolutely agree with you. There are studies that confirm or at least support the idea that prayer helped. But then there are studies that say that it doesn't, and studies that say that it actually does the opposite. And it's all a wash to me.
How will you?
And I don't think demons have anything. I don't think demons have anything to do with. I'm sorry, and I don't think demons have anything to do with it either. I think that's just an ad hoc excuse that pastors make to explain away the data that's in front of them. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marco. What was your next thing?
Yeah, well, of course, some people argue that pastors are willing to go that far in order to confirm their religion. I totally understand that, but how would you explain just sudden remission just in that very exact point, the day after that person got prayed over?
Is it possible, Marco? Is it possible for people to go into remission exactly that way without prayer being associated with it?
I guess yes.
Yeah. You're basically asking me to explain a coincidence. But here's the thing, though.
It is exactly the same as if, just to go back to Eric's thing, it is exactly the same as saying, how can you explain that this cake exists if somebody didn't jump on 1 foot to make it?
Yeah.
It can happen without that. And so it did.
Well, I know a person who baked 100 cakes while jumping up and down on a foot, and their cakes were delicious. Like the logic doesn't really follow there. But I lost the point that we were just trying to make here. But you can see how the thing is, if you want to establish a causal link between the prayer and the healing, it has to be shown and tested. And if people are making up excuses, like certain pastors making excuses like demons are interfering, or God won't allow you to test him because he wants this to remain mysterious for the honest-hearted people, like then you're basically defeating the whole point of pointing towards evidence, because it's like, well, I have no idea whether that evidence has been interfered with by this deity or not, if that deity is even there. Maybe the deity, like I mentioned earlier with another caller, maybe the deity is a big trickster. And the deity just loves pulling the wool over human eyes and watching them run around in futility. Maybe the deity's doing that. Like, I don't know, but I don't have to worry about any of that, because those are all just remote possibilities that aren't really to be seriously considered.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I just don't consider coincidence an honest explanation. It's just not good enough for me. From a theist perspective, I would ask you guys just a tiny bit of comprehension, because we're already believing a God and we just cannot explain another possible cause for that healing rather than God itself or demons in this case. But I'm just wanted to say that point. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask you a question, Marco? You say we can't ignore these coincidences. We're not ignoring the coincidence. We're absolutely acknowledging the coincidence, and I'm acknowledging the studies that you brought forward. Those studies exist, okay? Like I said, but I have studies that say the exact opposite. Imagine two worlds, Marco. Okay, imagine two worlds. A world we live in where coincidences like this happen. Okay, imagine just for a moment that these are coincidences that people. Either coincidences or we have bad information about the story, but we'll set that aside for now. We'll say the information is reliable and these are coincidences. Now imagine a world where these coincidences never occur, ever. We never see coincidences like this of any type. Which world do you think would raise an eyebrow more? The world with coincidences or the world without?
World without.
Exactly. I'm the same way. If we lived in a world with zero coincidence, zero stuff like this happening, like defying statistics and defying our logic, that would be way weirder, way more strange than a world where this stuff happens occasionally. And it doesn't seem to have any preference on who it happens to. Both the faithful and the non-faithful alike get healed by spontaneous remission, or illnesses go away, all kinds of stuff like that. And that's just assuming that, like I said earlier, that's just assuming that the information we got is reliable. Doctors can mix up x-rays and MRIs. Doctors can misdiagnose. People can lie. In the case of, you said about people going up in front of the church and giving their stories, there's probably a mix, I would say, if I had to guess, there's probably a mix of honest-hearted people in there who are retelling accurate stories, or at least as accurate as they hope they to be. There might be people up there wanting to participate in the groupthink and either making things up as they go just to be a part of it. And there might be people going up there just to outright lie and be a part of it. Like we can't confirm this information, and I can't trust it. I do trust these studies. That's why I'm acknowledging the study that you brought forward. But there's a huge hurdle to overcome with just the information you're bringing to the table itself. Because right now, Marco, I'm sure you probably know somebody who was miraculously healed, or you yourself experienced it. You can come up here and say, this is what happened to me, this happened to my friend, and here's a sequence of events. And there are still so many questions that I will not be able to answer, or you won't be able to answer for me, to help me accept the story as accurate. I don't know if it's hallucinations. I don't know if it's misrepresenting or misremembering. I don't know what motivations might be behind this. I don't know if the doctors screwed up and mixed up MRIs and your friend didn't actually have cancer, but they thought they had cancer for a while. We're starting treatment. Like, all kinds of stuff can interfere with that. Couple that with what we see with our studies and how, like I said, it's all a wash. I ignore intercessory prayer altogether.
Yeah, of course. And yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So as a second factor that I just cannot simply ignore is the fact that certain people, not all of them, but just certain people who have experienced a miracle in themselves, have seen Jesus, actually seen him physically, or either hearing a voice or feeling a warmth in his or her body. That's just like a second factor that adds to the whole evidence as a theistic worldview. It's just something I just cannot additionally ignore. And of course,
what about sorry, Forrest, one second. What about Muslims who see Allah? What about Muslims who see Allah in their experiences? How do you explain that?
Well, yeah, of course, I can possibly say, well, their minds are creating that illusion, or maybe it's just a demon. For me, it's like two possible or three possible explanations.
How have you eliminated those possibilities from the Christians experiencing that?
What do you mean by that? To eliminate?
So I took what you just presented me, and I said, what if Muslims do it? And you say, well, they might be hallucinating. Maybe there's a demon involved. I'm asking you, how do you know that's not happening to the Christians experiencing that?
Yeah, well, because of course we go back to the Bible and confirmed within passages to see if that corresponds to reality.
The Muslim would use
a confirmation bias.
Yeah, and then the Muslim would go to the Quran to explain why their experiences are genuine and the Christian experience isn't genuine. So from my point of view as a non-believer, you're both presenting me the exact same evidence, and I see as poor on both sides. Is there anything more that you might have? Something that sets you apart from them?
Well, as I said, some people, of course, this is going to sound spiritual, but I just want to point it out. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of spiritual warfare, that there's actually in the sky demons and angels fighting for our lives, fighting for our souls, whatever. Some people have claimed to see them when they go into fasting and prayers. Somehow they can gain the spirit of discernment from the Holy Spirit.
Again, Marco, I understand that's a reason that you consider, but that's also a reason that the Muslim considers, and that they'll also bring that to the table. You guys are still the same to me. So, just to cut to the chase here, okay? I mean, put yourself outside of this whole thing. Imagine this, okay? This is a good analogy, or a good illustration. Imagine tomorrow an alien landed. We call him Alan the Alien, all right? Alan the Alien has never heard about Christianity, never heard about Islam, never heard about any religions at all. In fact, it's a completely foreign concept. Alan's intelligent. He can reason. He can do math. He can converse with you, and you can teach him new concepts and words. But you're trying to teach him and get him to accept your claims about this miraculous healing and all that. And then next to you is a Muslim trying to convince Alan of the same thing. What can you possibly tell to Alan that the Muslim can't? How do you convince Alan the Alien that you're right?
Yeah, I would just repeat the same things that probably you guys already know.
And we already established that the Muslim says all the same exact things. So you're still the same. From Alan's perspective, you two are both the same. Well, you both can't be right because you both have conflicting beliefs. Both beliefs can't be right at the same time because they're different gods, different stories. So help Alan out here. What do you tell Alan?
Well, I would probably tell him, well, why don't you get ministered over so that you can gain discernment? If you have a whole open heart, you will gain the Holy Spirit inside of you. That's the theistic point of view. I cannot explain something really special, something additional that would you guys consider to be special.
I'm sorry, Marco. Can you not imagine the Muslim also saying that? You need to open your heart, be ministered over, read the Quran, let Allah's spirit fill you, and you'll understand. Like, you're the same still. Nothing changed. You're still the same as the Muslim. Yeah. So tell you what, I don't want to like beat this to death. Okay, and I'm sure Forrest has stuff to say too. But
it's okay.
Consider that. Consider how your explanation and the Muslim's explanation are the same and yet lead to conflicting conclusions. And that should tell you a little bit about your explanation and the problems with it. But go ahead, Forrest.
So I have a completely different thing. Because like the last few minutes here, like talking about everything you've been saying, Marco, like that is a completely different conversation for me that I would love to have. But like, I don't want to miss out on the beginning of this. We're talking about faith healing. We're talking about prayer as a function of medicine. And the one thing that I feel like we were talking about the whole time, but I don't know if anyone actually said the words, is correlation versus causation. And like, I don't want you to walk away from this conversation thinking that every single time you brought up something magical, every time you brought up something that was divine, that we just said that was a coincidence. And then every time there was a natural explanation, we were willing to accept it without hand waving it away this way. The difference is correlation as opposed to causation. So if we can say these people prayed and then they got better, those two events were correlated, but we don't know if they were causal. We don't know if one caused the other to happen. And a great example of that, are you familiar with a scientist from the 1800s named Ignaz Semmelweis?
Sorry, I'm not.
That's fine. Not a lot of people are, as it turns out. So in the 1800s, there was two hospitals, and I believe this was in Austria, I think. There were these two hospitals. One of them was like a teaching hospital where like the best doctors worked to train new doctors, and the other was like this free clinic thing that like was just run by nurses. And people would go here to give birth. Mothers would go there and give birth to children. And at this time in the 1800s, there was this thing they called it childbed fever, where right after giving birth, these women would get extremely sick and die, and huge mortality rate. Giving birth was a very dangerous thing to do because you would get childbed fever and you'd fucking die. And it just so happened that at the teaching hospital where the best doctors worked, skyrocketing rates of childbed fever. Like people would go out of their way to not go to that hospital and go to the nurses' hospital where lots of people still died of childbed fever, but it was significantly less. So Ignaz Semmelweis was this doctor who worked in this area at the time. And he noticed a difference that at the teaching hospital, they were also performing autopsies. And people would do autopsies and then walk upstairs with the same tools and do surgeries and help people give birth. And over at the nurses' hospital, they weren't doing autopsies, and they were also cleaning up. They were cleaning their hands and their utensils and everything like that. And so Ignaz came up with this radical, crazy fucking idea that doctors should wash their hands before they do surgery and before they help out in labor and give birth, like help someone give birth. They should wash their hands. They should wash their tools. And so he starts implementing this, and people start washing their hands, and all of a sudden, death rates drop. Mortality rates plummet. Nobody's getting childbed fever anymore because nobody is being treated with the same disgusting hands and tools that were just inside random dead bodies 2 minutes ago, right? Now, what's crazy about Ignaz's story is that Ignaz was an asshole and refused to publish his evidence. He was very angry and would like call every other doctor an idiot. Anybody who didn't believe with him, believe what he was saying, he would call them all stupid and say they should be all fired and all the. And he was very jealous of his ideas and would like guard them. He didn't publish anything for peer review. Ignaz actually died in a mental institution because he was behaving so erratically that they locked him up. And sure enough, right after he wasn't in authority anymore, people stopped washing their hands, death rate skyrocketed again. So here's the moral of the story, right? There's a correlation here, right? Ignaz is saying wash your hands, and it just so happens when people wash their hands, death rates go down. That is a correlation. Now, when do you believe Ignaz? When do you start saying that actually there might be something to this hand washing thing? Is it when it happens sometimes? Is it when it happens a lot? Or is it when we can actually demonstrate that there is a causal relationship between washing your hands and the mortality rate? For us, for Eric and I, we're waiting for that causal relationship. You can say a person was prayed over and they got healed. You can say some people got prayed over and they were healed. You can say millions of people got prayed over and they were healed. But it's still just you saying shit until we actually run the tests and actually find out what's going on. Before we had evidence of germ theory, you should not have believed Ignaz, even though he was fucking right, because he didn't establish a causal relationship. He just showed a correlation, and he refused to study it. You have this correlation, but you don't have causation. You don't have any evidence that this God is real, or that prayer actually works, or that demons are real and they're interfering with all this. You're just adding on all this stuff without actually testing any of it and demonstrating it. And as Eric pointed out, when we try to test it, it happens at about the same rate as random chance. And so, like, there's just not a reason to actually believe what you're saying. Even if what you're saying is right, there is no good reason to believe it. Does that make sense to you, Marco?
Yes, I understand. I understand your point. What would be a synonym for correlation in this case, in these testimonies? What would be a synonym for that word?
I don't know of a specific synonym, but just like a coincidence. To say I prayed and I got better, that is correlated behavior. In the same way, I gave an example a little while ago, like there was a thunder outside and then a cup fell out of my cabinet. Those two things are correlated. They happen together, but they may not be causal. I don't know that the thunder caused the cup to fall out of the cabinet, right? I would need to then have a relationship there that I can actually establish, rather than just saying these two things happen at the same time. So now I expect that thunder will cause cups to fall down. That doesn't make any sense.
And,
and
Marco,
go ahead,
Marco.
A third point. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that humans, we don't process the reality quite in the best ways. You know, humans are pattern seekers, and it's part of a way that we developed as a species. All right. So there's lots of things that we don't do quite right or don't do quite logically. One is we're really good at recognizing patterns. If we look at certain things, we can see patterns in like the ocean or up in clouds, or we can see it in numbers. We're really, really good at observing patterns. The problem is, though, we can be a little bit too good at doing that. We can start seeing patterns that aren't necessarily there. So we'll start seeing like, oh, hey, when I do this, this happens. Or when I see that happen, then this other thing happens. And we can see that happen enough to start to develop the opinion that the one thing causes the other. And that's not necessarily the case. A causal connection has to be demonstrated. It can't just be shown in a handful of examples, while simultaneously ignoring examples where there was no correlation or no causation. So it's like we're really good at recognizing those patterns. Mix that with religion, which is built to be placating and comforting and do all this kind of utility functioning for us. Then we can get into a little bit of a trap here, where we will see things that give us comfort because it's a nice idea. My grandma's sick and she's not doing well. I'll pray. Oh, hey, she got better. Somebody had my back. Like there's an emotional comfort there, and the way our brains are wired and the way we are, that can reinforce and get us to start believing that these coincidences are actually causes. One is causing the other. And that's why I think it's good that you're looking at studies. You picked one study that was favorable, and you seem to have ignored the other studies that are not. The one study I mentioned, which I totally didn't put the link in the chat. I'll put the link in the chat right now, so that if you rewatch this video, you can go to this timestamp. You should be able to see it in the chat. But the aggregate study that put all the studies together shows that, hey, yeah, we see it all kinds of different directions, which, as Forrest said, just pans out to random chance. It's just a wash. But we want to be careful that we don't let our brains do things outside of logic. We want to be sure that we aren't letting our emotional needs, that a God is looking out for us and will heal us if we ask him, to get in the way of actually finding the truth. It might be the case that there is a God, and for whatever reason, he'd only answer certain prayers or whatever, but this is not how you would reach that conclusion in any logical way. And finally, I'll say one more thing before I pass it back to you. This goes back to a previous caller again, where we talk about falsification. You should ask yourself, if this isn't true, if I was wrong about this idea, what could I do? What could I analyze? What could I ask myself and investigate that would tell me that? Because we talked about studies. Yeah, we talked about studies, and we talked about how it happens over here and it doesn't happen over here. And we use like the cake analogy, and we did all kinds of stuff, right? But anybody can make up any ad hoc excuse about why that reasoning doesn't work. You brought up a pastor mentioning, well, maybe demons are interfering. Other people will say, well, God's being mysterious because he doesn't want you to really know the truth, or he wants you to have faith. Like, those are excuses. Those are excuses to eliminate that falsification and keep you in the trap of finding only confirmation for your belief. So do yourself a favor and find yourself a solid falsification criterion for this proposition, and then go test that. And if you can't find one, understand that you're holding a belief that you can, by definition, only confirm. And that explanation conflicts with other explanations, and now you're not on the pathway to truth at all there. You're kind of stuck in a room with no exit door. And that's not what you want to be. But go ahead. Give us your 2 cents, Marco. We're going to probably wrap up here pretty soon. We've been going for 4 hours now. So feel free to give us your 2 cents, and we'll part ways.
Yeah, just the final words. Just another testimony. The pastor in my church, of course, right now, just to clear it, I'm having troubles with Christianity, and I'm sort of starting to deconstruct, especially because of the moral limitations it sets for your life, for your musical life, your sexual life, whatever. But these kind of testimonies kept me in because I just cannot ignore reality. But I just wanted to mention that one guy was being prayed over because he had no arms, and people start seeing how it suddenly grew in front of their very eyes, that his arm started to grow as a fully healthy limb. But
did you see this?
Yeah, did you see this?
No, I did not. I just got told that
so
that happened.
Why is it, Marco? Why is it that these things never happen on camera? And why is it that God never heals amputees? If an arm needs to be a little bit longer, that's something we can pull out. But if an arm is like removed, it never goes back. Why do you think that is?
I do not have the answer for that, but I just wanted to point that out. I would like to see in person. I would also like to see in person people levitate during exorcisms and all that stuff.
Right.
However,
it would be great if we had video of that thing happening, but we just don't. It just so happens that the more cameras are involved, the less miracles seem to take place.
Yeah. And Marco, I just want to say I appreciate your it's a very vulnerable admission that, hey, I'm a believer Christianity, but I have my doubts, and here's the reasons why. I mean, I can appreciate that, because that's exactly the process that I went through when I started deconverting. I started seeing things I couldn't answer that made me uncomfortable, and that's what got me thinking. So, I mean, I'm glad to hear you've taken that step, and it's great that you're doing that. But when it comes to these anecdotes, these stories that people tell us, maybe looking at it this way, because Forrest made a great point in that I think there's a website called Why Doesn't God Heal Amputees.com or something like that. But we have no concrete evidence pictures, videos, doctor records of somebody growing a limb back, somebody regenerating a lost eye or a lost organ. We don't have any evidence of somebody regaining body parts or even coming back from the dead based off of anything, let alone prayer. Okay. But we do have lots of stories about this. So let's just go with that story. Okay. So we'll just water it down to somebody was sick, or I'm sorry, somebody lost a limb, they were prayed over and they healed. And then you hear this story. A possibility is, sure, the prayer worked, God heard it, and the God healed this amputee, and that's the explanation. But let's pretend for a moment that that's not a correct explanation. What are some other explanations that you can come up with to explain this story?
I would not have any other explanation, honestly.
You can't think of a single one?
I would say I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay, that's a fair answer. Yeah. Lying, hallucinations, false memories. Maybe somebody wrote this down and somebody read it wrong.
But two or three or four people at the same time hallucinating the same thing. It's just
how. That's the thing, though. So you don't have two or three or four people. You have a story of that.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you did have two or three or four people all attesting to this, those things are still there. Those explanations are still there. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Forrest.
No, I was going to say, like, I can tell you the same exact thing. I can tell you any story you like about anything, about a magic fish that grants wishes, and 100 people saw it, and whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And I can say 1 million people were there for it. Or I could pass the story down to my children and them to their children and them to their children. And eventually there will be 100 people that all believe this thing and all confirm it and all talk about it and all talk about the experience that it has in their lives. But that's the thing, man. Things aren't true because they're nice. Things aren't true because they're helpful. Things aren't true because a lot of people believe them. Things aren't true because they help somebody out of a bad spot. Things aren't true because they make us feel good. Things aren't true because they hold society together. Things are true because they're true. And so if it's true, we should be able to find evidence for it. And if we don't, we shouldn't believe it. That's really the long and short of this entire call.
Yeah. But hey, Marco, let's actually beef. I'll let you talk, Marco, but I just want to wrap up where I was taking the alternate explanations thing. Okay. Let's actually beef up your story and say 5 eyewitnesses came forward and they said, we were all there. We saw this person regenerate a limb. They don't provide evidence. They don't provide photos or videos or doctor reports or anything. They just have the story. Okay. Because if they had provided those things, you wouldn't rely on the story. You would just go off of the evidence. But that's what they got. They have a story. Okay. So an explanation is that God actually did this and the prayer worked. And then I brought some stuff to the table. It was false memories. Forrest brought lying to the table. I brought forward hallucinations. I brought down misreporting based on, some type of error in communication between parties, things like that. Now ask yourself about plausibility. Okay. Ask yourself about plausibility. What's more plausible? A God did it, or 5 people got together and lied about it? What's more plausible?
Both of them.
A God did it.
Both of them.
No, what's more plausible? What happens more often? If you were to gamble, if you were to bet money on it, which one would you pick?
Based on, I would first ask the evidence. What's the evidence? At least for a doctor, I would ask some kind of study.
The evidence.
Or
all you have is the testimony of the 5 people. You don't have anything else. You have to bet money on the correct answer. What do you bet your money on?
I wouldn't even bet on either side, honestly, because if somebody comes with a testimony,
how about this, Marco? How many people on the planet have lied?
Trillions and zillions, I know.
Yeah. Quadrillions of people. How many people on the planet have spontaneously regenerated a limb?
Well, if you have a photography of that limb previously, and you have a photography of that afterwards,
I'll even take this one person as your answer. You can say one person has regenerated a limb. So you have one hand, millions of people lying. People lie all the time, versus a guy regenerated a limb, and we're talking about plausibility and you betting money on what actually happened. Where do you place your money?
On people lying, of course, but
right,
that's more plausible. Yeah.
So
based on logic, of course.
Yeah, so you can apply that to the God explanation versus any other explanation. And I think if you apply that same flow of logic, the natural explanations will always win out over the supernatural one, because by definition, a miracle is the least likely thing to have happened.
I know.
So until you
We
have
address
something
that.
better than until you have something better than
But
anecdotes and stories, play it safe. Bet wisely.
okay, but what would you consider personally an evidence, scientific evidence? An image from a scan from a doctor, study, some stuff like that, or what would you
Sure,
consider
I could think of
evidence?
sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. I can think of all kinds of better pieces of evidence than just anecdotes. I can think of doctor's reports. I can think of a series of x-rays that are dated and validated by a doctor. I can look at video footage. In fact, you can go on YouTube right now. There was a guy, I think he was working on a model airplane, and the propeller was turned on, and the propeller sliced off a good chunk of his thumb, like a good chunk of the tip of his thumb, not like a lot of bone or anything like that, but it was a good chunk of his thumb. He posted a time lapse of him using this special, I don't quite remember, it was a special new medicine. It was derived from like a pig stomach lining or something, putting medicine on this thumb, and he documented that thumb growing back, nail and all. That would be cool evidence. Like, I would accept that as evidence that somebody regenerated a limb. Now, would that get me to a God and the prayer did it? Not necessarily, but oh boy, you would get me a lot closer if you gave me something like that rather than a story, you know?
Yeah, but at least
I'm not declaring.
you have that evidence.
I'm not declaring the. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in the example you just mentioned, you would have like a physical evidence of that medical element introduced in the body and suddenly causing this effect. But
maybe he was praying. Maybe he was praying too. Maybe he was praying too.
Marco, like what's so frustrating about this, Marco, is that we've been going for 42 minutes now, and like what's consistently happening is that you'll say something, we will explain thoroughly why we don't believe, and it seems like you just move on to the next. Like, well, what about this? What about this? Like in Eric's point there, Eric just said that he had a series of images of somebody's thumb growing back. Do you believe that is a thing that happened?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that his thumb grew back because leprechauns caused it to grow back?
I don't understand that word you mentioned. Sorry, I'm not an English native speaker.
Let's pick it. That's okay. Your English is better than my Spanish. No worries at all. Pick a different one. Unicorns. Do you know what a unicorn is?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you know that a unicorn didn't shoot his thumb with magical energy that caused it to grow back?
Because we have never seen manifestations of a unicorn without hallucinations.
Sure.
I would argue.
So here we are now where we have no good evidence. We have no good evidence for a unicorn existing. We have no good evidence for gods or demons or anything existing, as Eric thoroughly demonstrated when you were talking to him earlier about there's no difference at all between your evidence for your God and any other religion's evidence for their gods. So we have nothing that definitively points towards your gods or your demons or any of that stuff being real. The same way we have no evidence of any unicorns being real, despite people saying they've seen unicorns and stuff. People say they've seen aliens. People say they've seen the Loch Ness Monster and all sorts of other creatures of all people say that stuff. And sometimes we have fuzzy pictures, but we don't have any really good evidence. So why do you rule out unicorns, but you don't rule out God?
Because both things could be made up by human minds. But if God exists,
that's not an answer.
So
both things can be made up. I agree. But why do you pick one to say that one is plausible, possible, reasonable, something that you would actually willingly believe in when you have the exact same level of evidence as you do for unicorns?
Because people have experienced sudden healing, and actually they feel it physically, something in their stomach, in their limbs, in their head.
Marco, how many of those people how many of those people who experience sudden healing would it take to tell you that their sudden healing was caused by a unicorn for you to believe it?
One. Because
so if one person heals and tells you that a unicorn caused it, you would believe them.
Yeah, I would say, well, not necessarily a unicorn, because I would just say, okay, that person was healed. We don't know how. So that's the point. If we know that God is real, and
that's what you should be saying for your God. We don't know how. If it could have been nothing, it could have been magic, it could have been a million things. But you shouldn't assume that it's unicorns. You shouldn't assume that it's a god, and you certainly shouldn't take it seriously. If anybody tells you that there is a magical explanation for something, you should not take them seriously unless you have good evidence that rules out other possibilities, and you don't have that for God. That's why, we just don't buy it. And with that, it doesn't matter if it's in this moment or not. You can't just say, I assume this is true because someday I might have a good reason. It'll be your last point, because we got to wrap up. We're going way over time already.
Yeah, we got to wrap up. Okay. Go ahead, Marco. Give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned that maybe a doctor report, or at least that the doctor could be lying, but X-rays are not lying. They're telling you the evidence. They're showing you the images of that bone that was broken and was suddenly healed.
Provide us some X-rays.
Impressed. I will find that evidence. I can send it to you by email. I can
find the evidence. Find the evidence, and be sure it comes from a verifiable source. Okay, because we live in the age of AI and fakery. So go dig up the evidence. And if you if you find out you're just operating off of just a story, think about the plausibility questions we raised, or think about alternate explanations.
Yes, I will.
Or think about conflicting religious claims that are contradictory to yours. And also think about the falsification thing. If you were wrong about it, how would you know? Because Marco, I'll be honest with you, I think you're trapped in a room with no exit door right now, because anything that we raise, any objection we raise, any reason we can show you that you're wrong, you can find an excuse to get around it. And that's not the way to get to truth. And I guess finally, ask yourself, why aren't you applying unicorn logic to your God? What's the difference, and why are you exempting your God from that same logic? So anyway, Marco, this was a fun conversation. I had a good time, and like I said, it was a neat coincidence that I studied this up last night and wrote a whole document on it in my notes. So
it's because
thanks for coming in, and it's got to be Jesus.
Yeah, please give me the link of that study you mentioned earlier at this conversation, and if possible, sure. I will get the X-ray evidence, send it to you for the same person, the same doctor, whatever.
Yeah, that'd be great. Feel free to send that evidence. I'm sorry, can you say that again?
If you're honestly willing to take an honest look on that evidence, on that X-ray evidence or that cancer evidence, whatever, I will reach out to you and send it to you.
Sure. Feel free to email me. Feel free to email me at skepticsandscoundrels@gmail.com. I just posted the link again in the chat, so next time you look at it, just look at the link in the chat near this timestamp. I will probably have questions. If you present it to me, I'll probably have questions, but we'll see. But anyway, all right, Marco, hey, you have a good night. Thank you so much for the conversation, and be well.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, Marco.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
All right. I lost the window. I got to find the window so I can close the call. There we go. Thank you so much.
I close it. We're good.
Okay, cool. Hey, this was an amazing night. Let me go through the schedule for the rest of the weeks, and we can wrap this up. Arden, I think, really, really wants to go to sleep or get some dinner or something.
I've got to study.
So I don't blame him. Yeah. You don't have to study. You got to study. Let's go to the 4 hours. Tell you what, we're only halfway through.
I took notes. We did a test review, and I took notes, and I got like 80% of it down. But there's a couple of things I need to brush up on. Nice. Yeah, sounds like fun work. I gotta go make dinner, and I'm gonna probably continue to work on my research. I'm starting to do a parallel reading of the Gospels, to do a side-by-side thing to see about similarities and differences in the way it was written, the way it was presented. It can be pretty fun. I think it'll be a few more weeks. So I'll probably do a video on my channel, I think. We'll see. Anyway, so for the rest of the week, we have... remember the fucking tracks and the cuneate and gracilis portions of the posterior fasciculus of the spinal cord, because I can't remember fucking tracts.
I remember. I know what spinal cord means. Okay.
It's a bad time.
Yeah, I know. I'll never make it as a biologist. I gotta not stop trying. Okay. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. So tomorrow for Skeptalk. No, today's the 16th. So tomorrow for Skeptalk, we have John Gleason as host at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. No co-host yet. On the 18th, we have Chewed Gum with Alyssa Lube and Eve Was Framed. On Wednesday, we have The Hangout with Matt Dillahunty and Ian Harris. And on the 20th, we have Arden Hart and Luxander hosting TACIS. On the 22nd, we have a Cus I Wanna, and that's going to be with Forrest, Valkai, and Austin Archer. So that's going to be on the 22nd.
No, it's not. It's going to be with me and Roxanne for League. Yeah, it's going to be me and Roxanne.
Yeah. The schedule lied to me.
Arden, we switch.
I think I copy posted what was the original event, which was with Roxanne, and now it's copied the wrong information. But yes,
Roxanne's cool as shit. Everybody should watch that one. She's a social psychologist, and she's very interesting.
She is the coolest.
I'll forgive you this time, Arden. I'll forgive you this time. So okay, and then the rest of the week, next Sunday we have Forrest, Valkai, and Seth Andrews at the 7 p.m. show, and looks like we have Matt Dillahunty and nobody listed currently for the 2 p.m. show. So that's what we have to look forward to. Forrest, we all done here? Can we roll the credits? Let you study.
Hey, is anybody wearing headphones out there? If you are,
I did not need that.
Have a great night, everybody.
I'm done.
Bye.
I'm done. Goodbye.
Oh, so we're still here. We just have to sit here like
and
assholes.
now we're just here and grilling.
Disappointed.
Like,